Yes, good morning and welcome to the biannual meeting of the Oregon Statewide Collaborative. I want to first thank the Oregon Cascade West COG for hosting us. And I will actually immediately turn it over to Billy, who will then introduce our speaker for some opening remarks.
Good morning. I'm Billy McGregor. I am here with the Albany Area NPO and employee of the Oregon Cascades West Council of Governments. We're graciously have our executive director here, Paul Egbert, to welcome you to the agency.
Thanks, Billy. Hello, everyone, and hello to everyone online. Thanks for inviting me in. I'm the new agency director for the COG. And those of you that know Ryan Vogt, he's the executive director who's overseeing both the COG and the local community services consortium. So under our new structure, I'll be the agency director here for the COG and working closely with Ryan and the new director of the CSC here locally in the region. And I'm really excited to be here. Wonderful staff, important mission, and just a vital partner in the region here. And I'm grateful for the opportunity and grateful to be invited here to say hello. And we're grateful to host you here today and I think we'll be a part of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, again, thanks you all again for hosting us. I'll do a quick time check already. And let's see. How many folks do I hate to just immediately start with being a bad timekeeper, but I do think we might quickly go around the room, just briefly introduce ourselves, our role, and I'll probably start here. Again, you've heard from Billy, you heard from Paul. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Chris Melson. I'm the manager of the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit at ODOT, and I'm the current chair of the OMSC. So sorry, Paul was skipping and probably go down this line with Chris.
Chris Johnson, Nelson Nygaard.
I'm Matt Bin. I'm manager of Metro's modeling section. I'm on the executive committee.
Peter Bosa, I work at Metro as well. I'm on the OMSC executive committee and also chair of the modeling program coordination committee, subcommittee, MPC. I just call it MPC. So.
Joe Broach, also from Metro, current chair of the Travel Survey Subcommittee and part of the OMUG coordinating committee.
I'm Thor Morris. I'm with ODOT economist working under Chris. I'm pretty new to the agency. It's my next week, so plugging right in.
Good morning, everybody. Dr. Horowitz. I'm a transportation engineer with PPAP, leading one half of the engineering, one half of the team on the engineering side for the Metropolitan Transportation Planning Program, formerly known as CFAP, with ODOT, working with our modeling and analysis practice.
Hi, my name is Jin Ren. I'm also ODOT senior modeler. I'm responsible for Region 3, the South Region, and Region 5, East Region, for the last almost 12 years right now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Deering. I'm from PBOT, City of Portland. I'm the travel demand modeler there.
Logan Hoover, I'm the researcher in the ODOT Climate Office.
Tricia Tanner, I work under Chris Melson as a transportation analyst and modeler.
Josh Jashinsky, I'm a transportation planner, Central Lane MPO.
And Kelly Clark, transportation planner at the Central Lane MPO, or part of the Lane Council of Governments. And I'm also on the leadership team for the Travel Survey Subcommittee.
Alex Bettinardi, ODOT modeling, and I help organize the technical tools subcommittee.
Carol Richardson, OMSC facilitator. Just,
shall I just do roll call like before? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's best. Thank you, Carol.
Matt Bagwell, if you'd like to just turn your camera on quickly and say hello.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Matt Bagwell, ODOT Research. Nice to see everyone today.
Brian Lee. Yes,
Good morning, everybody. Brian Leaf from the Puget Sound Regional Council in Seattle, Washington.
Ben, are you on?
Hi, folks. Ben Cheney, ODOT TPAL with the Dapper team.
Dan?
I always miss it. You said it correctly, Carol.
The mic's over here. Maybe that.
Dehan, are you on?
Sorry, that was double muted. Dayon Didich with ODOT TPAL.
Mike Jaffe.
Mike Jaffe with the Salem Kaiser Area MPO.
Joel Friedman.
Hi, all. Joel Friedman with RSG.
Joseph Off.
Joseph Off with the City of Hillsborough.
Liming Wong.
Liming Wang, Portland State University, one of the OMA coordinator, along with Chris and Joe.
Chi Mai.
Good morning, Chi Mai with ODOT TPAL.
Harrington.
Good morning, Mark Harrington with RTC MP up in Vancouver.
Andrea Martinenko.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said Beth. No, hi, my name's Kendra Martinenko, Salem Kaiser MPO.
Cody Meyer.
Good morning, Cody Meyer, Oregon DLCD.
Michael Orman.
Hey, Michael Orman, Air Quality Planning Section Manager for Oregon DEQ.
James Powell.
I'm transportation emissions modeler for DEQ. James Powell.
Shen Chu.
Good morning, Shen Chu, ODOT TPAL.
Kim Safinar.
Hi, Kim Sapinar, the Salem Kaiser MPO.
Zahora Sultana.
Good morning, I'm Zohra Sultana, Travel Demand Modeler, Modeling Group, TPAL ODOT, covering Region 2 and 4.
Tyler Dickey.
Yeah, Tyler Dickey with the Bend MPO.
And Yazid.
Hi, Yazid with the Rogue Valley and Middle Rogue MPOs.
Well, great. What a good group.
The mics, Billy?
Yes.
Those are the mics, yes.
The mic up. Okay.
We have to watch what we're saying.
All right.
Yes, what a great group. Also, what a great group in person. And also, I was just going to say, Carol, well done on the names pronunciation. When I was in Louisiana, I was involved in training, and I would hand out training certificates. I had to say all those kind of interesting Southern Louisiana names, and I was always nervous of mispronouncing them. So well done. But yeah, we'll get started. So we'll just kind of do a quick overview of the agenda today. After this quick overview of the agenda, I'll provide a quick overview of the OMSC. We'll then talk about the travel surveys. We'll have an update on our Oregon travel survey, some of those activities, as well as a guest, which you just saw here, Brian Lee from the Puget Sound Regional Council, talking about their reading current travel survey and their uses of that data. Then we'll talk about our progress on developing, an Oregon-specific ABM platform. So Alex and I will have a quick update on the status of that. We'll have a break from noon to 1:30. We'll come back promptly at 1:30 and talk about, you saw kind of a little bit of the name change in terms of CFEC, but essentially an update on those requirements of the transportation planning rule, update that Zachary will give on the guidance documents, but also an update on the multimodal inventory project. And then we'll have information from Jeff Hood from Metro about their land use model, and as is customary, kind of ending on notices for folks to be aware of, including upcoming conferences and those sorts of things. So that's what we'll do today. Is I'll hand it over to me to do a quick overview of the OMSC. And we were thinking, we see several new faces here, honestly, including new faces to leadership, myself included, Matt, Peter, those sorts of folks. We thought it'd be a good idea just to touch base on the OMSC, what we do, what we're not. And frankly, I think it's a good idea to do this just on a recurrent basis anyway. Just to remind ourselves of who we are, especially just how things are with staff turnovers and retirements and that sort of thing. So part of this overview, I'll be talking really briefly a little bit of a historical context to how the OMSC started, but quickly kind of bring it back up to the current status. So we'll talk a little bit about the mission and purpose of the OMSC, how it's structured, how we structure and guide activities, some of the key roles, and a little bit of a clarification of what we're not. We're not like a formal advisory committee. So if we could maybe the next two slides, Carol. So starting with the history, and again, I've been in my role almost 3 years, so just keep that in mind as I give this history. But the OMSC started in 1996. Around that same time, ODOT more formally established their modeling group, the Oregon Modeling Improvement Program. Also around the same time, ODOT was developing the statewide model, the statewide integrated model, SWIM. And really the initial start of the OMSC, with the name being the Oregon Modeling Steering Committee, was established with the purpose of helping provide input, coordination from the modeling folks here in the development of the statewide model. But also around that same time, OMUG, the Oregon Modeling Users Group, was established, as we just heard. That's still a big function of the OMSC. And then over time, essentially drifting away from that specific purpose of informing the statewide model and more on general coordination, more on leveraging resources beyond that, essentially occurred. And I noted a couple of big things here. I'll be honest, a little bit of a multi-purpose of why I wanted to present this was the value added, essentially, of the OMSC, to continue to communicate that and showcase that. And so some of the big things I was also going to highlight in the past that have been coordinated through the OMSC has been essentially using Metro's Geminar platform, having at the basis for the other MPO models, including ODOT's ones that we maintain, and also the previous travel survey that was conducted in 2011, the Oregon Household Activity Survey at that time. And I also wanted to highlight those two because you can see parallels of some of the major efforts that's currently being coordinated through the OMSC. So essentially through time, it moved away from that specific purpose, and in 2019 had a formal name, or is it formal? I don't know. We changed our names to the Oregon Modeling Statewide Collaborative. And I actually really like that word collaborative because it really does represent what the OMSC does. Also, as I mentioned, I wanted just to kind of highlight some big significant efforts that the OMSC did previously. As I mentioned, it was kind of that Geminar consistency of the base models there, and then also the previous household survey. And of course, there's a lot of other activities through that 20 plus years as well. I think some of you would likely know those more than I do, but wanted to highlight some of the significant efforts. And then I was just going to probably, again, reiterate the value added here, where this actual organization is quite unique. just a little bit of an outsider perspective. When I was in Louisiana, I knew about the OMSC. I participated on some OMUG webinars, and actually was trying to do something like this in Louisiana. So it is quite unique, where some states, again, are not so moving these things collected forward, or some states there's a really big lead agency, maybe the state DOT, that's more formally organizing these activities. But here we're quite separate, but coming together to coordinate these activities and leverage our resources. So again, a really big value added that way and quite unique. As I was mentioning, kind of bringing it back to the current status. Typically, we establish a work plan every 2 years. So we recently established one for the calendar years 2025 to the end of 2026. At that time, we also kind of make sure that the purpose and mission makes sense. So this is the current mission and purpose of the OMSC. I won't read through that directly, but again, if you think of that collaborative word and definition, a big part of that is, of course, coordination of the activities. And it's actually really great to see even the agenda today. You can see, again, the TPR modeling requirements, or the Oregon Household Travel Survey that we're doing now, or the activity-based model development. I mean, these major activities really just embody our mission and goals. Again, so it's basically that interagency coordination, leveraging the technical resources, our technical staff time, and coordinating those efforts forward. Again, clarificate, like a disclaimer, I don't know, like you have like those drug commercials and there's disclaimers on here. A big disclaimer is that, again, we're not an official advisory committee. And so what does that mean? That we don't have this, I'll just read this one actually, the authority to make decisions on behalf, like OMSC is not making a decision on behalf of Metro or on behalf of ODOT. So we don't have that sort of authority. And then also, as we're coordinating these things, developing guidances, sharing best practices, it's also not a mandate or something to use those guidances or those best practices, whereas the OMSC set us to do that. Again, it's not that sort of function and that formal capacity. And just to kind of say, oh, is that good? Is that bad? There's trade-offs to that, of course. So if you look at the advantages, people are here, the agency staff are here because it's important to them. They're essentially using their staff time to participate in these activities on a voluntary basis. So that's great, where we see the value in that, and we can focus on, problem solving and some of the technical issues versus focusing on some of the formal obligations of an advisory committee, for example. So yeah, I was going to pause here. I was going to maybe see if I wanted to highlight anything else. I guess kind of the trade-offs. Yeah, there's no formal funding, like, hey, OMSC gets this amount of money. Again, the funding is coming from the agencies. The staff time, again, is coming from the agencies that way. And then as well as, again, not mandating something, but, taking what we have here is at the discretion of the agencies. Anyway, yeah, disclaimer there. I think we kind of understand that, but every once in a while, I think in the past that there's been some confusion around there. And as I mentioned, let's highlight some of the current big things that we're coordinating through the OMSC. Again, a little bit of parallel to what I showed before. Again, the ABM development, which we'll hear more here shortly, as well as the current Oregon Travel Survey. Again, so these are the big value added that the OMSC has and continues to provide. And then this is, again, we're not only doing these giant, these big things, but we're also, leveraging the technical knowledge of staff and the tech in these areas, coordinating these specific topics. Is also something that we do. Okay. As I mentioned, that we develop a work plan every 2 years. And so again, this current work plan covers 2025 through 2026. So again, that work plan, you can find that. You can find other information about the OMSC through this website here. The work plan, it talks about our purpose and goals, talks about our structure. It also defines a really well done, really well thought out, detailed work of specific items that we like to accomplish throughout those 2 years as well. Actually, if you haven't seen that, I would recommend that you do look at that and kind of peruse that. And that really gives you a good idea of what we're focusing on within these 2 years. Let me do a quick time check. And these are the formal structure of the OMSC. There is the executive committee. You heard some folks introduce themselves as being part of the executive committee. It includes a chair, includes a co-chair. So Matt's the co-chair. And part of that executive committee is representation from ODOT, from Metro, from a mid-sized MPO, and from a small MPO. And the current subcommittees are the Modeling Program Coordination Subcommittee. That's the name, Peter. That's the subcommittee that you chaired. Right on your hand.
That could have been better.
You got it. The technical tools, and that is about model development and challenges and issues and implementation. The Technical Tools Subcommittee, which Alex is the lead on, and then we've heard also the Travel Survey Subcommittee, such an important subcommittee with the coordination of the current travel survey, and also really continue conversations around what the next travel survey will be. And then also we heard I think everyone's here also from the OMUG. So we mentioned the OMUG as well. That's a little bit more of the outreach, maybe not focusing on specific Oregon things that we're coordinating here. So kind of bringing best practices, but maybe a little wider outlook from the greater transportation modeling community. And I'll briefly end on a couple of slides. One, again, here's the current leadership also defined at each of the work plans when we do that. So this is defined for 2025 through 2026. I think you saw everyone there. And also another thing, if you do look through the work plan, there is specific topic areas that's highlighted and things to just kind of keep abreast of, to provide status on, or just keep understanding the best practices in these areas. So we also define topic leaders in these specific topics that are important to us. And sometimes we'll ask those topic leaders to present information about that. Obviously, you hear today about the ABMs. You'll hear today about the transportation planning rule requirements from Zachary. And so we identify essentially kind of contact folks for that. And also listed here is those 3 main folks for the OMUG. And I think I'll end here, I believe. So yeah, if you do have any questions, actually, again, very good website, very well organized, very good content. Feel free to look at that, look at our work plan. And then, as mentioned, I am the chair. So if you do have any questions about the OMSC, let me know. Any quick questions or anything like that before transitioning to our next speakers? Just a quick question. I'll ask a question myself. It's just weird. But for folks, is this the first time you've had like an overview of the OMSC, that you've heard that? I'm just kind of curious if this was something that was helpful. As I mentioned, there's several new faces.
Here a long time. I don't know if I've heard it quite like that. I don't know.
Okay.
This was excellent. Appreciated that.
Okay, great. Well, very good. Right. Carol, I don't know. I probably went over time, so I apologize. So I think, yeah, we'll transition to the next presenters. As I mentioned about the Oregon Travel Survey. So we'll have Joe kind of update us on the status of that, and also probably a little bit of future thinking there as well. And then after that update, we'll hear from, again, Puget Sound Region Council, Brian Lee, about how they're using their recurrent survey and data as well. So I'll hand it over to you, Joe.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah, Chris and I didn't coordinate on this, but it was great to see that timeline and the Oregon Travel Survey's place in it. I'm gonna first give you a little treat because I got one yesterday and take us even further back in the past. Those online I know can't see it, but a colleague at Metro was cleaning out some files and handed me a big box of materials from the 1994 Oregon and Southwest Washington Activity and Travel Behavior Survey. So how far we've come from filling out 30 pages by hand of every address of every activity that you did.
Really, 30 pages?
I know, I'm keeping that. Make sure that doesn't travel around too far. And I really appreciate this too. I mean, you couldn't send out a calendar invite then, so when you got your assigned travel days, you got this little guy which has a space marked up to put your refrigerator magnet here. Not forget your travel days. It was very state of the art though. Doing a 2-day an activity rather than just a trip based travel survey was already really innovative, and that was in coordination with. That was a partnership of ODOT and Metro. If my history doesn't fail me, and it has since expanded, as Chris said, to a statewide, coordinated effort, still including our friends and Mark Harrington up in Southwest Washington. And then this is perfect. I'll bring us up to the present, and then Brian Lee from Puget Sound Regional Council is one of the programs we've been looking to, as part of the path toward our survey future, or a potential path forward to keep the survey state of the art. So I'm glad to be here today to give you a quick update though. Let me mention my fellow members of the leadership committee. Kelly Clark with Central Lane is here in the room. Becky Knutson, a big missing presence in the room today, and has a very important point of bringing us from that old paper survey to the present, honestly. And so thanks so much to Becky, who is now retired but still shows up to meetings. She can't stop, and we're not gonna tell her not to come. I also wanted to note that, well, let me first mention, as Chris laid out so nicely, our primary goal is to work collaboratively together with agencies and other partners and keep this survey on track to happen regularly and to remain a state-of-the-art sort of travel behavior survey. We're pretty unique in doing it in a statewide coordinated effort. There are not many places that are able to pull that off, and I hear that a lot when at conferences or meetings out of state. People really are kind of envious of our level of coordination. So kudos to everyone who's put in time to make that happen. And we also try to learn, to stay on top of what's happening and not rest on our laurels. And that's why we talk to smart people like Brian Lee, who we're going to hear from here soon. I also want to note that you'll be seeing some new faces popping up around the travel survey. And they happen to all be here in the room, which is great. So we have Matt Ben, also from Metro's, helping support me. We have Josh Kaczynski at Central Lane with Kelly. And then we have Thor Morris, who's sitting here to my left, who is slowly learning from the wealth of knowledge of Becky at ODOT and helping us out on that side. So we're a big crew making this all happen. And here's our little timeline just from the current survey effort, which we've branded the Oregon Travel Study. Most of you have probably heard of it by now. Probably a fair number of you actually participated in the survey. Could we get a quick show of hands online in the room who actually was able to participate in the Oregon Travel Study? I didn't get one. I was kind of yeah, so quite a few. We hit a lot of the state, and something tells me you all were more likely to respond maybe than the average person. But that's really
over 10%.
Why you wouldn't be random?
It was randomly mailed to you, but of course the response is not always random. So this effort goes all the way back to 2019 when Chris Johnson, who's here in the room, was sitting in my seat on the survey subcommittee and starting to plan for this. And of course, that was smooth sailing because 2020 to 2022 were just normal years, right? As I recall. So that it was a challenging process. It always is to kind of spin up a big statewide survey ever like this. But we found a great team. We've had wonderful partners at RSG, who are our consulting partners. And I think overall, it's been as smooth a process as something like this can be. So our data collection started with a pilot spring of 2023 and wrapped up in early summer of last year of 2024. And at this point, I'm gonna take you through this in slightly more detail, but we're in the phase of processing and taking delivery of that survey data, also expanding on it with some savings we were able to realize from the contracting point of view. And so data, I know that we're a little later than I guess we had initially hoped, but there's a reason for that, and I'm going to kind of take you through that. It's a good reason. The data is going to come better and with more batteries included than the original deliverable would have. So we did, as I said, complete survey collection last summer, and we ended up with 22,000 households, exceeding our minimum target by quite a bit. In fact, we had to be pretty conservative and budget enough to handle the post-pandemic reality. We didn't know how. No one really knew at that point who was going into the field how response rates were going to be affected by all of the changes and shifts that happened through the pandemic. But we did well. I think thanks a lot to that planning effort that stretched way back. We made some running changes based on pilot response rates that I think really helped us dial in our invitations, our incentive structure, and our sampling strategy. And very exciting thing and a first for us is that over half of people chose to participate in the 7-day smartphone-enabled survey versus a 1 or 2 day that we've done in the past. So we're getting many times more data. When you see 22,000 households, this is generating much more data than that number would have in the past, since we're getting a full week's worth of travel and activities. It's pretty exciting, and you see there how it adds up. It's a lot of travel days and trips that are in the final stages of being processed. And so right now, some of you have helped, and thank you to those that have. We're doing some interagency review of the final data products and wrapping up the documentation, and we expect to take delivery of that late this spring, as long as everything goes well and they're able to handle the comments that we give. We also have an external independent auditor of the data to be sure that everything is buttoned down, since this is new data to us. I always like to throw a teaser in. Notice at the bottom, this is preliminary unweighted data. Do not report. This is a Joe Broach graphic, and it's worth about what that sounds like it's worth. But I just wanted to make the case that, you're looking at this graphic. This is a new data set. It's pretty exciting. We've never been able to show this graphic with our survey data before, because we would only collect on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right? So you couldn't see this is showing the weekly commute trip rate by day of week. This is just in the metro area where I was doing my data review. And you can kind of see, no surprise, we see that in a lot of regions now, that we have this kind of peak travel midweek, and most of us are not in the office as much on a Monday or a Friday. Of course, we're capturing that work from home travel as well. But I also want to point you out over to that right edge, right? This is completely new pot of data for us, right? Look at this group of, I think we got 1,000 trips statewide that were commute trips on a Saturday or a Sunday. So this is a segment of the traveling population that we just were blind to from a survey point of view before, right? But they're users of the system and probably experience it really differently. Especially from, say, a transit access point of view or a traffic point of view, right? So I think this is really showing that this is we're going to be discovering things we can do with this data set, I think, for a long time. I'm not going to talk through all these bullets, because I want to keep us moving, but I do want to remind folks with the project savings, and part of the reason that we stretched out our schedule a bit is we were able to execute an amendment to our contract to get quite a bit of other work done to enhance and extend the survey data. And thanks a ton to Kelly and her team for, and also Becky's support with ODOT for handling this contract amendment. It's never simple, but we got it done. And I think the work is going to be of a lot of value. A lot of it is increased resources towards improving the data itself, recovering a lot of trips that in normal survey processing would just have to be thrown out. So doing some extra work to piece those back together and include them in the data set. And then increased support for a data visualization, an enhanced data visualization tool. And those of you who are more engaged with the survey, I want to point your attention to the end of this month, April 30th, we have a workshop that I think many of you have been invited to, where we're going to solicit some feedback on what you would like to see in a data visualization, data access tool that's going to be wider spread. Of course, all our agency partners will still have the full data set, but sometimes it's nice to just go look up a statistic and get a visual that you can plop in a presentation, right, instead of data. So we're excited to kind of see what folks want in terms of a data viz tool, and going to be hosting that again April 30th. So if you weren't on the invite list, please, I think you can email Carol. I hope I didn't make her grimace over there, but or me or any of us, and we'll make sure that you have the information to participate. We also have quite a few other studies, including one exciting one we heard about yesterday for the first time, the results of our in-depth interviews with lower SES households and less common travel patterns, including things like night shift work and using alternative modes, and just some fascinating insights there to inform policy and kind of guide us going forward. And we'll be presenting that more broadly, but we got kind of a sneak peek at the results of those. That was 100 households participated in the survey, signed on to do interviews, in-depth interviews with our consulting partners. So the upcoming quick timeline, just so that we have it here in the record, like I said, processing delivery documentation through this spring, as well as the in-depth interviews and reporting. And then we're going to be working on that, taking feedback and working on the data visualization tool through the summer, and we'll have that hopefully ready to go live in the fall, although many of you will see it before. We have a value of time study. It's going to be the first large scale one, I think, that's that's local, that's Oregon specific. So that's going to be really helpful for the developing our new modeling framework, I think, to have some localized values of time rather than having to borrow them nationally. And then our enhanced survey process, we continue to coordinate closely with ABM Development and Alex Bettinardi's team. Finally, sort of on the horizon, like I said, look out for additional opportunities to review. We have several things coming through for interagency review, and we're trying to identify kind of subject matter experts and stakeholders there. We're updating our data archiving and sharing plan, trying to make it easier for researchers and others to make use of our data. And I finally started planning for the future of the survey, and this segues nicely into our next presenter. We're looking at several peer agency techniques for instituting a more frequent, something like a rolling survey rather than every 10 to 15 years. That's kind of been our standard. I see one question in the chat. Let's see. When we have final data to use, change, save the world. Well, I don't want to promise when it'll be everyone's hands, but like I said, we're still targeting late this spring to accept delivery of the data, and then it's just figuring out, the archiving, dissemination, how to get the documentation to everyone. So I would hope sometime this summer that be available to folks like Josh to start making the world better. But this is an exciting data set, I think, for all of us. I know we've all been eager to get it, but we want to be sure that it's the best it can be and that we're confident in the data. So do appreciate your patience and ongoing support. And researchers, as always, Sal will have access through us. We're also working with the National Renewable Energy Lab, which runs the Transportation Secure Data Center. And it's seeming likely that it will also be hosted there to make the data even more easily accessible. And there it's in two forms. There's a more public version with spatially identifying information scrubbed for those that just need the basics of the travel survey. And then there's a you can apply for access, anyone can, for a spatially enabled data product. And they do a good job with, ensuring privacy protection, but also use for research. But we always are excited for, especially our homegrown researchers to get their hands on the data as soon as possible. Excited to see what you do with it. All right, I think with that, I
have a quick question.
Oh, yes, please.
The sample size for 1994 and the 2010, if I remember, 1994 was 6,000, or I'm just curious about those numbers. Like how many households you collected because you got 3 surveys.
Yeah, that's right. 2011, boy, Becky might remember. It was similar. I mean,
ballpark.
We always aim for about a 1%.
Alex knows, isn't it about 18,000?
19,000, I think.
Yeah, it was right. Yeah, right there. I can't remember the exact number, but right.
So it rises over time to be representative of the population increase. But it's typically aim for about a 1% of household sample size. I think we will exceed that this time.
The original one in the 90s was just a 3 MPO survey, so it was nowhere near the same size. I don't remember the number, but it was.
I remember about 6,000.
6,000.
All right.
Well, wouldn't this one be much more representative then, with 3 times the size?
Well, it was a smaller geographic area. They were 94. It wasn't covering the whole state. So I'm not sure. I mean, we have made changes to the sampling strategy to try to make it more representative, because there are groups that get undersampled. We aim for 1% in the state, but not everyone responds at the same rates. And each time we've implemented new strategic sampling strategies. In fact, in some cases this time, to try to get those hard to reach households, we exhausted the sampling frame. There were no more addresses to get within certain subsegments of, like, say land use density crossed with socioeconomic. So we did a lot, which is one reason we're thinking about potentially different strategies than the one-shot huge effort, where we can be even more strategic with reaching people who are harder to hear from, but are also users of our transportation system. All right, I want to be sure to try to keep us more or less on schedule. So I think Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's very much a pleasure, and we really appreciate Brian Lee joining us. I've been learning from him since my dissertation days, I would say, and he has had a long history in travel behavior and survey research, and has been part of what, to me, is sort of a national example of one of the most well-known and best-running household survey efforts up in the Puget Sound region. So really excited to have him here today to talk a little bit about what they've been doing and how they've been using that survey program up there. So thanks, Brian. I'll hand it over to you and get the screen here.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate having me here. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. And then move you guys out of there. All right. So as Joe mentioned, a couple things. I'm program manager here at the Puget Sound Regional Council. I run our household travel survey program, and I'm going to dive a little bit into this. Let's see, can I advance? Give me 1 second, okay? All right, so I'm going to divide up our time into these 3 general sections. I think everybody in the room seems to have some recognition or knowledge about surveys in general. I'm going to give you a specific intro into our survey at PSRC. And then I'm going to get into why did we go down the path that we did. As Joe alluded, there are many different flavors of it. So PSRC's is one flavor. And there are others that I think he's kind of looking into. And so specific to us, the reasons why we're doing it, and also how we're using this data for modeling and non-modeling purposes. Given the theme of this morning, I think everybody's required to have this chart, even though we didn't coordinate. We've had quite a long history of doing various types of travel studies They were not all surveys, and they were definitely not all household surveys. But we've been kind of doing this for more than 50 years. It's only in the most recent years, since 2017, that we've been doing these more frequent snapshots. The first three waves, the 2017, 2019, 2021, were kind of considered a pilot. We didn't really know what we were doing exactly. We had to kind of do a lot of compensation afterwards in terms of thinking about things that we didn't think ahead for, like kind of the data schema, how do we manage things. And then I think by the end of that, especially because of having COVID in 2020, right in the middle of that period, we kind of recognized the value for our agency to kind of keep going. So currently, we have an 8-year, 4-wave survey. We completed the 2023 one, and we're in the middle of data collection for the 2025 survey. These slides are available through Carol, and a couple of things of note. Lots more information on our webpage, and we also have a beta data explorer. So it's a visualization tool / querying tool to kind of do some less sophisticated, kind of the simpler things, so that we can focus data requests on more sophisticated items. This allows users to correctly apply the weights, can kind of answer pretty basic questions. Our program tool is pretty similar to others. We're specific to the 4-county region around Seattle. We're seeking a regionally representative sample data set. We do use address-based sampling. We have extensive representation of people and places with a pretty complex sampling protocol. And then we do post-processing to clean as well as weight the data. We do still have a focus on weekday, even though we do collect data with smartphone and up to 7 days. So we have some information on the weekend, similar to what Joe showed you with his chart. And then, of course, given that this is a household survey of residents, we recognize that we're excluding other types of travels like visitors, externals, and commercial. And we're kind of in the middle of thinking about how do we add a visitor component based on requests from our ports as well as our elected leaders. But that's something still kind of in the works at the brainstorming stage. I think all of you have some familiarity with this. A lot of data can be collected in our household travel survey, the 5 Ws, lots of different planning and policy related questions, some of them that we didn't know we really had a focus on until relatively recently. EV charging is a new thing. Telecommuting has really pulled into focus since COVID. So a lot of data that kind of complements other things like counts and big data from passively collected devices. But this is pretty central to us. And one of the reasons I think many of you know is that household travel surveys generally are able to connect directly observed demographics, a whole variety of them, to many different types of activities, behaviors that allow us to analyze for a variety of planning purposes. So we keep adding to this list. We just recently added some questions on disability as well as sexuality to complement other demographics. And then this year, we have more of a refinement of our telecommuting questions to help us possibly refine and further develop our analytics as well as modeling on that front. So why did we go towards what's termed a recurrent survey? So there are some big kind of problems that we saw. I joined PSRC 10 years ago, just as we wrapped up our 2014, 2015, the last big survey that we did. At the time, Billy Charlton was my boss, and he basically said, like, you know, it doesn't really work for us to be surveying every 6 to 10 years on this irregular basis. The data that we have can be a dozen years old by the time it gets to the end of its life. It doesn't really reflect what's going on. In addition to modeling, there were a lot of kind of interest in a variety of travel and travel-related types of things. At the time, autonomous vehicles was a big topic. We didn't really have any data on that. There were still, a lot of interest, not compared to today, but still interest on things like telework as a management tool for travel. And so being unable to have really up-to-date data for our models and being unable to monitor these trends have been a pain point. Every time we do something every 6 to 10 years, there's a lot of reinventing the wheel from many different perspectives. These translate into these overhead costs, issuing RFP, figuring out what we did last time. How do we try to keep things the same so that we can make comparisons while we're incorporating changes that has happened in the last 6 to 10 years? Doing a lot of kind of peer reviews of like what others have been doing. And then kind of living with some of those inconsistencies when we do get the data, which makes some of the comparisons difficult. Not to mention also these overhead costs means that we have to find staff time, even if you're using consultants, which everybody does. You have to be able to kind of find the expertise for people to have the management piece and some of the modeling and kind of analytical piece. And then lastly, it's what many people don't think of, but when you're managing one of these projects, one of the most difficult things with these big surveys every so often is that it's hard to find the budget. It's not like we have a piggy bank that we can stash away a little bit every year so that we can get a big pot. We have to have these ability to convince decision makers, many of whom weren't elected or around for the last time, so they don't really get to see the value in the data, or it's a lot of kind of re-education. So having these budget challenges really meant that we weren't able to keep things regular because sometimes we just weren't able to kind of come up with the money when we think we need to have a survey and things get delayed, plus or minus 1 or 2 years. It's not uncommon. And so for us, ever since we started doing our surveys, and for us is doing it every 2 springs. So in the odd years, we do our data collection in the spring. We've been able to kind of set expectations for all sorts of internal and external stakeholders. We have a timeline of delivery. We have a timeline of findings that we report to a lot of people internally through our committees and boards. Our elected officials are almost constantly hearing about different uses of our data. If they have some questions about various aspects of it, it's not uncommon for us to pick something from what's available in the data. So there is this constant education and dialogue about using something that is useful for us. We also have a lot of partners within our region, some of whom do make purchases for add-on samples. So previously, if people in these other jurisdictions were not able to come up with a budget for their uses, there's no telling when the next time is. With this, we usually say, okay, you're interested. What does your budget look like? We have conversations with them. And then if they're able to kind of join us, great. If they're not, we tell them, well, do what you can in the next couple of years to see what your budget is like. And then we're coming around again in 2 years. So that has worked pretty well in the last few cycles with some of the larger jurisdictions buying in. In-house at PSRC, we've been able to maintain a lot of institutional knowledge, not just from the project management perspective, but we have a lot of in-house capability to do a variety of data processing, developing pipelines for our modeling and our analytical work. We've been developing tools that allow us to more easily access this, and it's kind of stay fresh in people's minds in terms of like, how do we use this data, the complexities of it, and how do we think about changes that we want to adapt while balancing it out with consistencies that we want for a kind of longitudinal set of data set. And then lastly, this budget thing has been really useful. So we basically have a survey for every biennium budget. There's a dedicated line for it. The people that make decisions on our budget regularly sees our data and uses about it. And so there's a continuous dialogue about how this feeds into our work and how our work kind of benefits from this resource. Just a few other kind of considerations. For us, the contracting has been a relatively straightforward thing. We issue one RFP for a multi-year program. After each survey, we have an option to either terminate or we continue with the next year's. There's relative good cost savings in terms of time and money to not have to issue RFP every single time if things work out. But there's also some safeguards that we have some freedom to kind of explore other options if things do not work out. As I kind of mentioned, we've kind of been able to take the advantage of the cycle to collect data, refine, develop, get our materials out, and then kind of consider how that fits in with a multi-year database and to be able to create support for this infrastructure with a variety of automation and programming. And then the last point is really about standardization within our agency, but also across with other folks. Joe has joined us and a few other agencies from around the country, including the Bay Area, San Diego, the Twin Cities, New York City. Folks that are actively doing a lot of travel survey and activity-based modeling, kind of looking into how we can kind of share resources in terms of looking at comparing data, but also various types of tools from data visualization, data processing, as well as kind of modeling. So that is kind of like a big kind of discussion topic. I'm going to spend just the rest of this time very quickly with you all in terms of some of the uses. I won't dive into the models specifically, just to mention that in our region, we have a travel model that's activity-based called Soundcast. We have a bunch of submodels. I think we call them baby casts. So in 2023, the city of Bellevue did an add-on with our survey program and to get some data to kind of help calibrate their submodel. Pierce County has a submodel, and they are a partner in 2025. They're collecting an oversample for their model. And then uses with our land use model as well. I'll mention that with modeling, we've been able to combine multiple years of data when it's appropriate. So before the pandemic, we were doing some light re-estimation using 2017 and 2019 combined data. We've been doing some analyses recently on housing displacement, combining actually 2019, 2021, and 2023 data with various kind of modeling mechanism to kind of account for different time periods. So it's been really flexible for us on the modeling front. On the analytic front, this is not traditionally the main use of household travel survey, but it's becoming more and more important, especially since COVID. Everybody wants to know how things are changing, how things have changed. Lucky for us, we kind of started this with two really good base in 2017 and 2019 as a point of comparison for before COVID. And we're able to kind of monitor a variety of activities. So some examples, such as looking at VMT, there's several of these that I'll show you, but there's a lot more where this came from. Kind of monitoring regional trends, we're able to kind of look at this at the county level as well. That dip in 2021 is familiar in many of our charts. This is trips per resident, looking at how travel behavior, people traveled less, a quarter less in 2021, and they bounced back in 2023, but not back to the same level of travel in terms of the number of trips on an average weekday compared to before COVID. This is mode share. This is one that kind of drives home the points that while the amount of travel may fluctuate, so the size of the pie may become bigger or smaller, but there's a lot of inertia in terms of our transportation system and the behavior in terms of like the types of modes that people use. So with the exception with this little dip for the drive in 2021 and that little spike in walk in 2021, everything is fairly constant at the regional level. It's not at the sub-regional level, but kind of comes to show what the system view looks like when you zoom all the way out. Telecommute is a big thing, so kind of looking at ways in which people are working, whether at home, hybrid, or some form of fully remote, how that's been changing and likely be changing in 2025. We're able to kind of zoom into a specific year like this in 2023 to look at different geographies. This is by the home location. We have something similar for the work location that kind of shows that the spatial distribution of jobs really relate to whether people are able to and are actually doing remote work. Another set of trends, but this one a little bit different with the pandemic, heightened amount of delivery. We're working with some folks at the University of Washington and in New York in terms of looking at how we can estimate freight using a perspective of packages being received at the home end, so the types of induced demand on freight. And then what that spatial distribution looks like for a particular year, like in 2023. So this very last one is has a bunch of links in it. It represents a subset of the analysis work that we've done for our various committees and groups focus on different topics of interest. So we kind of tailor our analyses to different topics. Sometimes they're modal, sometimes they are specific to a land use related topic. They're all kind of intersected with different types of socio-demographics, so there's often an equity lens. And then as interested by our stakeholders, there's very often a geographic lens that allows us to kind of dive in, looking at how things are different in different places around our region. So I think I'm right on time. Happy to answer different questions. I think I just gave a bunch of teasers and happy to kind of follow up with anyone that's interested beyond now. So I'll just pause there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. Yeah, there's several questions. Go ahead, Peter.
Great. Thank you, Brian. This was really fascinating, and I really appreciate how you laid out the benefits of doing the recurrent survey. My question is there an aspect of, is there a longitudinal aspect to the recurrent survey? Are you looking at the same households or the same individuals year to year? Was there ever any thought to do that?
No and yes. So each one of these is cross-sectional. Each one of these are considered independent, even though we know we're, for certain segments, we are inviting people, the same people. And so it wouldn't surprise us if there are repeated observations of households. We just don't identify it. It's fairly easy, I think, to do a panel type where you follow the same household. We've done that in the past. There's a pretty long series from the late 80s into the early 2000s. I think something like 10 or 11 waves of it. That was a boom for researchers. It wasn't really used internally very much. And until I find a good use for it, I think we're going to leave that option open. I think it's possible, but I just don't think right now the amount of effort and cost that would be worth it until we have a real plan on how we would use it, probably for modeling purposes, but maybe other types of analytical purposes.
Bunch, but I'm holding them. Josh is one.
Yeah, I guess Josh has a question. Brian, not sure if you wanted to read Josh's or
Josh, feel free to
sure.
ask.
So Josh said, what a good story that sticks out to you when an executive or regional leader references the survey program or data information from one or more of the surveys. Let's see. We had some. They're usually last minute stuff. So we had light rail station openings for our link to Linwood to the north. I think something like 2 days, no, not even, like a day and a half before the opening, the county was fishing around for data on like, what is this going to do? What are the kind of current aspects of it? So I was helping to kind of pull together some information, kind of looking at in Snohomish County, the share of riders, transit users, and then pull together some modeling outcome in terms of like what that will look like in 2050. So very quick thing. You know, a part of it was transit use is not huge, right? So you're going from like a pretty small number to another number that's bigger, but still can look pretty small. So a chunk of that time was trying to figure out like, how do we frame this? Oh, we can't just tell them the raw number. We have to say something like, well, the numbers between now and then will grow by X percent. And that kind of framing allows them to kind of say something in a speech that sounds bigger. But I remember the county staff was very appreciative of us being able to kind of pull some modeling numbers pretty quickly and also have the baseline number to kind of reference in terms of recent trends. So, and that kind of sticks with you because those folks are kind of scrambling at the same time with the speechwriter, and they weren't sure which of our senators were coming into town. So it's just very typical of like, it's an emergency when it didn't need to be an emergency, but we just had the data on hand.
Yeah, great example, Brian.
I can read out my question. I put it in the chat too, but I know there's there's differences between the infrequent and the frequent surveys in terms of like what exactly you're getting. But do you have a rough estimate of like what are the cost savings in terms of like a per study?
The cost saving, I would actually say, in terms of dollar amount, for consultants, it's not something that I would necessarily sell on, meaning like I don't think it's like that big that will break your bank or kind of like get you that much more sample. In terms of like the tasks, you're getting some cost savings in terms of not having to create a new questionnaire or have a revisit of the questionnaire that kind of takes a lot of time. You take what you did last year, you look at how you want to refine it, what do you want to change about the instrument. You're saving some costs there. The biggest cost items in these surveys are in the actual implementation. And so the implementation costs, well, actually, another thing is that you don't have to do a pilot, right? So your data from 2 years ago tells you something about the response rates for the different geographies, the different populations. So if you leave a survey long enough, you'll probably want to spend a chunk of money on a pilot that will tell you something about what you would expect from your region as far as responses is concerned. So that is probably the biggest item. I think a lot of the other things are kind of in-house. Like we don't have to spend a whole bunch of staff time, and those things are harder to account. But because it's part of our routine, people are doing it as part of their job regularly and not just finding people who can kind of participate every 10 years. I think that's something that's harder to quantify, but it's definitely something that is worth something.
I don't know, Becky, I don't know if you want to chime in, but I remember in 2010, the 2010 survey, Becky felt like she was on a roadshow every day trying to make sure we didn't lose funding for 2010. Because of how, like it's a one-time shot and it's not regular, it's not a line item, and you just constantly fighting to make sure we didn't lose that.
I really, I don't want Brian's last point to be lost either. I thought that was, I think that's really important. It might not be in the survey budget, but all those scripts we wrote to handle the data in 2010 and 2011, they're not useful at all.
Totally obsolete. Yeah.
And that goes into all of our work, all of our workflows. And so we track it to some degree, like at Metro, time spent on, but not really. So I think that could be significant, and maybe we want to think about a way to frame that savings to agencies on just the using the data side and building these tools that make the processing more efficient.
2019 to where we are now in 2025, just think of all the momentum that we've gathered, right? And, to do another survey in 2035, it's just, you're starting over, right? And so can you imagine?
Years of startup,
But while I have the mic, Brian, are you all, in terms of the recurrent surveys, are you all doing what I would call like normal representative samples, or are these sort of smaller sample sizes that you're refreshing kind of a main large survey with, right? And so
yeah, so I wish I had the ability to scope to for technical reason, I'm always scoping to budget. And so kind of by definition, if I'm doing something 5 times per decade versus once per decade, I'm not getting 5 times the budget to do it. So these are smaller samples.
Okay.
And so in the last 4 surveys, 2017 through to 2023, we've been getting roughly around 3,000 households. Sometimes bigger, particularly with more oversample in specific areas. But we aim to get sufficient amount of data to do analyses at the regional and county level for many things with high confidence and relatively small margins of error. As all of you know, you give an inch and people ask for a foot. So you start doing analyses and they're like, well, can you break this down further? Or can you break this community down further? So people will always want more. And part of the roadshow that we go on is kind of different ways to say, no, we can't do that. But if you give me more money, then maybe we could do it next time. So for modeling purposes and for a lot of the analytical purposes, we think for our region, roughly around 3,000 is sufficient. For things like telecommute, it really doesn't make sense to combine multiple years. For more stable behaviors, residential choice, you can make an argument that certain things are not that different and you can combine multiple years, which we are doing. So it really depends on the topic of interest, how deep you want to dive into it, both geographically as well as sociodemographically, and then figure out what will be, sufficient if you must do analysis on a single year basis.
Okay, thanks.
I could do a quick follow-up on that too, Brian. It is not to put you on the spot, but the pandemic kind of threw a monkey wrench into this question. But in your mind, if you had to ballpark it, like how many waves do you feel like you would be comfortable combining for, say, model estimation purposes? Would it be 2, 3, even more? Because it is something we're thinking about, is how far we could go and still roll up the sample for modeling.
Yeah, I think that's really specific to the region. So I used to be in Vermont. I would never recommend a recurrent survey for the state of Vermont. And I can probably say if they do it, they could probably roll up 6, 8 years. And it's a function of like the amount of change that you're seeing, right? So For us, we have some big changes like the build out of our light rail network. On the road side, we have some large infrastructure like a replacement of a floating bridge that really kind of changed the capacity, some tolling things. So I think it really depends specifically on the area. For us, we're pretty comfortable with combining at least two. Very often when we did like the 2017 and 2019 combined, we had a base year of 2018 in between. I think we're probably comfortable with some topic with 3 years. So we now have 2023. That's kind of a little bit coming out of the pandemic. 2025, that's even more. For certain topics, doing it with 3 waves, it makes sense. I kind of mentioned that with displacement, we looked at modeling of displacement at the individual year level as well as combining them. And it turned out that there wasn't really a huge difference. And so we opted to kind of combine them, 3 years worth of data, one of which was before the pandemic. One is kind of in the midst of it in 2021 and one in 2023. So I think it gives you that flexibility to explore.
Thanks. That's really helpful.
Thanks, Brian. Matt, I'm not sure if you wanted the last question or. Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, great information, Brian. Thank you so much for sharing this. Very much appreciated. And as we were mentioning, we're definitely in the phase of learning from others on what makes sense for Oregon. So this is obviously helpful in that case too.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Alrighty. And so yeah, we'll have one presentation here before lunch, and it'll be about developing the Oregon-specific activity sim modeling platform, the ABM platform. That'll be the basis of our models moving forward. And this will be primarily Alex and I presenting some of that information. So in this presentation, we'll talk about kind of the high-level plan, the phases of work, what we're also building from as well. I've debated what to say about the funding aspect of it, but I have a slide for funding, so I'll share some information about that as well. So again, kind of over the plan of estimating this model, the phases of that work, and best estimates of the time frame of that work. And so honestly, I'll probably turn it over to you, Alex.
Yes, I think we're mainly looking forward with this, but we do want to just make sure everyone's on the same page. So we have a couple backward-looking slides, so or context-setting slides. So 5-ish or so of these. So as a reminder, we're building on the Activity Sim platform. As of just a month or so ago, Marty from Boston has joined the Cool Kids table at lunch. So it's even a cooler, more popular table now than it was previously. There's a bunch of cool reasons to go with Activity Sim. I think everyone gets it. If you want to go to the next slide. So, we have the principles on this slide, but money is on this slide. So a big benefit to going to Activity Sim, just to make sure everyone has the context. ODOT is fully stopped as of like 2019. ODOT has fully stopped putting any development dollars towards our current trip-based model or the ABM that we have in house. All of our development dollars have been going towards this new Activity Sim building on the new survey. So that's meant, $35,000 a year for 6 years towards Activity Sim, which is leveraged to be about $500,000 per year across the 14, 15 partners, and several other things which we'll get to at as the slides continue. But anyways, there's a huge benefit to being on Activity Sim. Once we get there, we'll have great partners like Brian to be able to coordinate with, because they'll be on a similar platform, as well as Marty and a whole bunch of other cool people across the country. So go ahead. Let's see. So everyone gets this, but just a reminder, Activity Sim or moving to an ABM brings a whole bunch of benefits. I like to think about it as when you're representing an individual family and set of travelers, you just have a ton more power than when you try and represent an aggregate zone or a homogenized zone of individuals. And that power gives you the ability to really supercharge your analysis. Go ahead. It's been said many times this morning, but we're building on a huge amount of collaboration and funding savings through the OMSC, both building on the survey work, and then I think a lot to do with Chris Johnson in the room, working as a collaborative towards this next set of tools for Oregon. Kendra gets naming rights, I think, and Peter gets picture rights, but
Golly gets.
You're in charge.
I like it.
You're not in charge yet. You can take the credit. You are operating the tool. So all of this work is building towards this great Oregon platform. And I just like this slide because it calls out that the software itself is just the crackly graham crackers. The survey is really like, you wouldn't want to eat a marshmallow-less s'more. That'd be horrible. It wouldn't be a s'more. So the survey data is absolutely critical. You do not have a tool without the survey data. So just I wanted to call out how important that was. It feels like I'm repeating myself a little bit. We're building on quite a foundation here. So we have the concrete's poured. Hopefully it doesn't rain for too long on just our empty concrete foundation before we build our house on this thing. But so we got the survey, we've got the design all done, we've got our GitHub repository, all of the groundwork's complete. We just have to build this house, which is, okay, so that's all the background context. We're going to shift towards the future. Is there any questions on background context? Okay, I think we're good. So where are we headed? So foundation's done. Phase, so there's kind of where we're headed is broken into 3 phases. Not quite sure how I like this numbering because it ignores all the prior phases, but everything else was phase 0. So phase 0 complete. We're on phase 1, 2, 3 right now. So we've got phase 1, where largely on agency staff, but can be supported by consultants. We need to get our estimation data together, our estimation data bundles, and that's partially the survey data, but then you have to wrap. I like how Brian brought up what happens if you get a new light rail system or a new floating bridge. Hopefully none of Oregon's bridges are be floating soon. Anyways, because they collapse and fall in the river and they're floating. You have to wrap all that survey data with the context of the environment. And so what that means is movement estimation is getting a roughly functioning ABM up and running to get ABM looking data into the estimation stream, where instead of ABM synthesized travelers, we have real OHAS travelers in that survey stream, but wrapped with all of the skims and land use data around them. So we need that estimation data set. So that's phase 1. So that all has to be kind of wrapped up this calendar year. And again, like largely on the agency's shoulders, but it can be supported by consultants. Phase 2, I've crossed all my fingers that we're going to go live with our consultant support for estimation next month in May. And so then, so that phase 2 part is like the core estimation work. We're building on the survey, building on the estimation data sets. We're going to have our graham crackers all built and cut into Oregon shapes, like in Peter's picture. Get those graham crackers all set, and then roll into estimation. Put the marshmallow. I don't know. Anyways, it's probably breaking down, but we'll have an actual estimated model, and then with the estimated model, all the behavior is set up, all the formulas are set up. It should produce really good-looking data, but it won't necessarily be perfectly calibrated, validated, sensitivity tested for in a given region, and so that's where phase 3 comes in. Likely heavily on individual agency staff, but also likely consultant supported to take these estimated models, take the inputs for a specific region, check them against transit ridership, bike use, auto ridership, dial them in, make sure they look good, and then they can start being officially used for all the reasons we use travel demand models. So that is. I think Chris will talk a little bit more about that, but that's the high level. Just a little bit more before I turn it back to Chris. The phase 1, the estimation data bundles, I just wanted to call out that there's a lot of work. We basically, so that we're all the agencies are creating those estimation data bundles consistently. We've been working both off the design document, but also kind of extrapolating a little bit to what our tool will look like. I've been working on getting instructions up and specs and standards for what all of the inputs need to look like. Still under review, still drafting, but just to note that there's like drafts working out there that the OMSC is collaborating on. Anyway, so I think that I'm going to turn it back to you, Chris, unless you want me to speak anything more about. I think we're advancing to the next slide for Chris.
Like I said, to be honest, I don't know what to share in terms of funding because there's just so much uncertainty. But just to kind of build upon what Alex has mentioned, first of all, I want to just thank Alex. I mean, this is a tremendous amount of effort to coordinate this across the state, but also just to prop up all of these contracts and that sort of thing. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, but yeah, we also had a design contract for this estimation model. Again, that was very much a collaborative effort with folks. That was completed previously. And so just to kind of reiterate the phases, and also, sorry, just to also provide a little bit of context, as Alex is mentioning, we're having a contract, so this would be an ODOT, facilitated a contract through our procurement processes to estimate. Are we calling it SMORE or SIMOR?
SMORE.
Okay.
Sounds like SMORE.
Okay. To develop SIMOR, essentially.
It's fairly big. We can't really change it now. We got to keep the SMORE as a
And so, as part of that contract, we have an option for this phase one, as Alex is mentioning. That's the data preparation of the bundles. ODOT's doing that work in-house, but for other MPOs that would like consultant support, they would have to provide funds, but there's an option for that in that contract to take advantage of that contract to help consultant support prepare those. And that phase two is really where that model is estimated. And then phase three is essentially, once it's estimated, work to essentially make it for the MPO specific region and have it be able for for use in the XRTP or those sorts of things. That phase three is also potential for consultant support. That's not scoped yet. Again, for ODOT purposes, we're thinking of doing that in-house, but there's also some cost estimates of what that might be for each of the MPO regions. Again, if it is something that the MPOs would like consultant support with. Again, the idea with that too is that the MPOs would be providing that specific funding. And so anyway, with phase two, again, that's the big thing. That's the actual estimation of the model. We're estimating, it depends on the number of rounds of estimation and how full the estimation is of us using the travel survey data. But the estimate is about that $1 million mark. And so we prepared this information really kind of at the request of OMPOC, where there were some discussions about potentially using some of those savings to contribute to the funding of this phase two, the funding of the model estimation. And so we've been kind of going back and forth. What's a good way to present some of this information? And we're thinking we can have like a bare bones type of estimation where we're not fully utilizing all of the Oregon Travel Survey elements. We're doing a partial estimation of specific, high priority elements, but not using that travel survey data fully, that full estimation rounds. And then we have like a recommended part where we are essentially using that data to the fullest amount. And so these are kind of the high level estimates, essentially for that recommended, which is really, again, utilizing that $6 million investment of the travel survey. I mean, really critical, frankly, is around that 1 million. The uncertainty is everywhere, unfortunately. The uncertainty is whether OMPOC wants to contribute funds for this. It's not the end of the fiscal year, excuse me, not federal, not the end of the fiscal year, but it sounds like we'll revisit that discussion at the end of the fiscal year once we know more about the exact savings, and then also kind of touching base on the MPOs to see if that's something they would like to contribute for. Another big uncertainty is everyone's budget for the next biennium, and that's true for ODOT, that's true for TPO's budget as well. But just as an FYI, this is for TPO's budget a very high priority. So we're asking for a decent amount of funds to essentially try to get it up to that recommended amount. But one thing I was trying to share here is how important those OMPOC funds actually are in terms of being able to estimate this in a timely manner, estimate it within that 2 years estimate of that. Otherwise, if we want that recommended value and we're kind of waiting for ODOT funds, it could be a possibility that's going to be in the next biennial. And so it just kind of, the timeline extends essentially of when we can estimate that model, develop that model, and for folks to use that model. So probably more context than I really needed to present here, so I apologize. But I want to at least present some information about how much this does cost and some of the uncertainties right now.
OMPOC contributed to the survey, right?
They funded the first
Scoping, right?
methodology, phase 1, and then our funding, like our staff time, LCOG staff time to manage the contract.
There's precedent for OMPOC contributing to something like this, right?
Yeah, and that's when we went to Bend and asked them to contribute funds. But what Chris is talking about is OMPOC has excess funds in their budget, and so this would be kind of moving the funds to the state contract. So we've been talking with all the MPOs about what that would look like, and if the guarantee is like of all of the needs statewide that we all MPOs all have. Is that how they would want to spend those funds? And there's a lot of different perspectives on whether or not that's the right approach or not.
So it's under active consideration then? Okay.
Eric Havig at ODOT has been leading those.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. There's, I think, about $400,000 or $350,000 there kind of on the table. And maybe it's a portion of that ends up going to the ABM development, while another portion goes to the smaller MPOs. And Joel, LCOG is a mid-sized MPO. The Central Lane MPO is a mid-sized. So I know it feels a little hurtful. So LCOG and are the two mid-sized MPOs. Or Central.
Yeah,
Lane.
I thought it was a bit conspicuous from its absence. That's why I asked. Thanks.
Yeah.
Amanda had a question, and then we have Yazid.
So I answered it. I just didn't know what OMPOC was, but Google told me.
Please ignore that website. It is very dated on my list of things to update.
I do have a question or more of a clarification for us for the Rogue Valley and Middle Rogue. We do have already an ABM model. Is that basically creating a new one, or are we talking about basically creating ABM for all the other MPOs?
So the model that Southern Oregon has and will continue to have uses 2010 survey data. So there is no funding to put the 23-24 data into that model. So so it'll still exist as a travel demand model. It just won't be based on this $6 million survey that the community just spent money on.
Well, basically updating the data within and all of that.
Yeah. So this new thing is the graham crackers and the marshmallows, all of it. Yeah.
And just to clarify, for the 5 smaller MPOs that ODOT maintains the models for, we're moving towards this similar platform, and so that's including the Southern Oregon ABM as well. It's moving towards this modeling platform and then estimated with the travel survey data. So just to kind of
the graham crackers and marshmallows. That's not very helpful.
So by default, the travel survey data would not be in the current ABM model, but a new ABM would need to be developed with all that data. Basically, is that what it is?
Well, you don't have to use the reason we're going to new ABM is because we get the benefit of not having to deploy ABMs on our own. So that's where instead of us spending several $100,000 a year to maintain our ABM, we're spending $35,000 a year to be a part of the partnership. That's the value of switching out the ABM. The survey data is not cheap to get into a travel demand model, whether trip-based or ABM. So there's several $100,000 worth of effort that go into getting new survey data into. It's not just plug and play. It's a fairly expensive process. And so we don't want to do that multiple times with our trip-based models, with our current ABM, with the new ABM. We're doing it once with the new ABM.
Okay, that clarifies it, yeah.
Sounds good. I apologize for not being so great at the time management. And just as an FYI, OMSC developed a handout and some really good information. Again, I think that Alex helped lead about the ABMs. We developed a handout for this work, like just phasing and an overview of what this will look like. Again, kind of at the for the OMPOC discussions, really, but it's also really good information. I'm not sure what that'll look like, but as you can say, we could be developing a similar one for this work. I was going to say, let me know if there's any specifics or things that you might be good to include in there. I probably won't include the specifics about the funding, but we might have Carol finalize that handout and might ask a few folks to review it to see what's good information to convey. Otherwise, yeah, I'll stop the meeting here. And as a reminder for folks, a break for lunch, and we'll start back up at 1:30. So yeah, hello everyone. Folks online, there's a couple of folks, not to name names, but Metro folks, that'll be arriving a little bit later. But we will go ahead and get started with our next agenda item. And I was mentioning in the morning, talking about the transportation planning rule and the requirements for metropolitan planning areas. And so with this, it'll be an update from Zachary, more on the guidance modeling side, then also with Teresa and Alex talking about the multimodal project, a status update and how that's going.
I can share my slide. No, you should do the slide for me.
And yeah, with that, we'll, I think, pull up Zachary's slides and I'll hand it over to you, Zachary.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I have a new computer and I'm in a room, so with microphones. So hopefully everybody will be able to hear me loud and clear. I'll let Carol go through the slides. I'll ask her to advance it for me. Next slide, and we'll get going. So as Chris mentioned, I'm here today to talk a little bit about our metropolitan planning work. This is sort of our rebrand of the climate friendly and equitable communities, the CFEC. Talk a handful of topics that have come up in some discussions we've had with MPOs. I'm not going to present a ton of new information, but I will say this is a little bit of an experiment in communications to try and talk about some of these questions that have come up over and over again and give us another chance to take a look at some of these aspects and application of VMP with our transportation planning rules, both Division 12 and Division 44. Next slide. Just a reminder that these rules apply to our 8 metropolitan areas and the cities and counties in those areas. All right, so the 4 areas I want to talk about today, and part of the challenge with any of these, and we could have a presentation on any of them individually, is that there is a lot of overlapping and interconnected aspects of these rules. So the 4 I'm going to talk about are the ones you see on your screen or here. The Division 44, the greenhouse gas target setting, both for Metro and for the other MPOs. The rule in Division 12, 905 on performance measures, specifically the one that relates to VMP per capita. Rule 830 on enhanced review of new capacity projects and how those all connect to Rule 160 about reducing VMP, and that's specifically for transportation systems. Okay, so coming back, I mean, again, this starts from, the Oregon legislature passed goals to try and reduce our greenhouse gas around the state, and then that gets filtered through our statewide transportation strategy all the way down to the Division 44 greenhouse gas target setting, Rule 20 for Metro and Rule 25 for the other metro areas. See that 30 and 35% by 2050 are the goals. These goals are VMT targets by year. Those are the 2050 targets, there's individual year targets within those. And one of the important things to recognize about Division 44 is these targets are BMP per capita and their four reductions after controlling for the effect of state and federal policies and other conditions on vehicles, fuel, and pricing. And one of the key things here is that our travel demand models that we use for our regional planning, for the most part, don't include those different elements. We certainly don't have we have different vehicles and different, not really fuels, and the pricing component is not really done in the same way that the statewide transportation strategy is done. The tool we do use for that, which was also to develop the target, was from a software program called Vision Eval, which we have here at Transportation Planning and Analysis Unit. And each of these MPOs can either develop their own targets through, the path to the target is through either the scenario plan or by using the statewide transportation strategy, the STS, and that calculating and measuring this information has been done in the past by Vision Eval. We expect it. I just want to point out that the VMT per capita related to Division 44 is more of a Vision Eval software calculation and not a travel demand model calculation. And just as a reminder, I don't want to say this is the only math we have in there, but really in terms of getting that emissions per person, that VMP is related to this emissions per mile, which is sort of related to the fuel component, and then sort of that miles per person, the miles per person is that VMP target that we're going for, and the emissions per person is what we're looking for those goals in Division 44. Okay, now turning over to Division 12, which we know is the transportation planning rules. I want to specifically focus on one of the performance measures, and it's listed there under that second bullet. And this comes from the development of the scenario plans, where we're looking at evaluating these performance measures. The three areas, Metro, Salem Kaiser, and Eugene Springfield, either have an adopted scenario plan or are working towards it and have to report on per capita. Among the other measures in there, both LCOG and Metro have selected BNP as a performance measure. Salem Kaiser is still working on it. In terms of reporting this out, again, there's many different kinds of BMT. We used this before, but we are specifically using for this aspect of the Rule 905, the definition of light vehicle household-based VMT per capita that you see in that OAR Section 5 division or subsection 64. And what I'll get to at the end of this presentation are sort of revised VMT calculation methodology in terms of implementing that aspect. Finally, we do have a research project. I don't know if it's been determined if it's been funded or not, but we're trying to collect a VMT, build a VMT data set, so we don't have to necessarily use the model. We can use reported data, which would be great. Next slide. Thank you. Okay. Yes. So the Rule 830, and this is an important aspect, doesn't really talk about VMT. It does talk a little bit about induced demand and VMT for that, but it's not the same VMT that I've been talking about. And then the Rule 830, again, this enhanced review used, and there's a whole nother presentation and actually a whole list of FAQs from that link below, also on our Metropolitan Transportation Planning ODOT website. That you can read about, and TSP guideline guidance on 830, and we're continuing to add to that and make revisions. But basically, the key thing here with the enhanced review are for projects that are new arterials, new highways and bridges, and expanded or new interchange, and a number of other things. There's some exceptions, including safety and for bike, ped, and transit projects, lanes less than half a mile. Operational project, but basically the key aspect here with the 830 project is it's a process for evaluating these projects, which include tons of community involvement, this measurement of induced demand, and there's some process for doing that, but it's not really related to VMT, except slide. Except if a jurisdiction completes the 830 work and it's authorized and they've included it on their financially constrained TSP, then that triggers the need to calculate VMT per capita per that prior rule, the section 64, for rule 160. And the transportation system, the jurisdiction, as they're evaluating their TSP, that includes now an enhanced capacity project, a Rule 830 project, will need to demonstrate that the VMT per capita of that jurisdiction in the future year is less than base year based on their financially constrained project list. And this is done not using Vision Eval, it's using the various travel demand models, either the one that Metro has for that jurisdiction, the ones that PPAL manages, or for COM or for BEND. And that's the tool we're using to measure VMT, and I'll talk a little bit about the methodology right now. So again, coming back to that definition, we're talking about all jurisdictional household-based light vehicles, regardless of where travel occurs. And again, this is different than how we've done VMT before, which is roadway link-based or internal to internal, for folks that are familiar with that. And we're really looking at it in three big buckets. And I have to say, this is right off, sort of hot off the press. This is a little bit of a revision on what we've talked about before, but I do want to call out now Metro for all of their amazing work over the last month, 2 months, and even before then, to really help us dial this in and make sure that we're getting good results, we're doing it correctly, the math makes sense, and then also to Alex and the ODOT team for doing all the things that I can't quite do with travel models. So I really appreciate all the help. And of course, to our consultant team, DKS, that really laid the groundwork over our project to really get that going. So thank you to everybody involved here. So we're looking at three different kinds of trips. Home-based trips of all types, these are home-based work, home-based shopping. Those we really have a good sense of where that home location is at the either origin or destination of the trip. We have a revision to our non-home-based trips. These are important trips to include. They are ones that don't necessarily start or end in at a household or even in the subject jurisdiction. And what we're doing to calculate those is looking at our trip generation by TEZ. We're using a mean trip distance, and we have a new modification that really provides a reduction for all the non-auto mode splits. And we're doing that based on all the trips that are generated by that area. Finally, we have, for the most part, settled on an external trip bit. So these are trips that are destined to or originating from a home location, and we're doing our best to calculate those trip VMT to and from the edge of the travel model area. Future work, we've done some work on here, but there's more to do to integrate our statewide integrated model SWIM in order to capture the full length of some of those trips in order to really meet the truest definition or the truest implementation of regardless of where travel occurs. All right, next slide. I got a few things here. So if you could just, I guess everything came up already. So just as a visual for the visual learners in the group, here are the four types of trips. Again, slightly modified. I just picked on Springfield here. This is just an example. You see the different types of trips, ones that are interzonal, ones that are going somewhere else in the model area for number 2. 3 is an example of a non-home-based trip. Someone lives in Springfield, works in Eugene, takes a trip to lunch and then back. That's a non-home-based trip. And then number 4, a trip that would be leaving, maybe going to Portland or to Albany for this meeting from Eugene. Maybe that's Kelly. But we're capturing that trip only to the model boundary. And then when she returns back to Eugene or Springfield, really, we pick up that trip and start the odometer ticking once we enter in the model boundary. All right. Well, I will say that in these discussions, I just have a few minutes left. I want to leave a little time for questions. There have been a number of things that have come up, and I want to try and cover some of those to make sure people understand and apologize if you've all heard this before and you maybe already understand it. So again, the calculation of VMT for your jurisdiction as part of your transportation system planning process is dependent on whether you have a Rule 830 project on your financially constrained list. If you don't have one, you don't have to calculate VMT per 160. Now, the model doesn't include just your jurisdiction, it includes all the jurisdictions in the MPO, and those jurisdictions also have their projects included on their financially constrained TSPs and on the regions, the MPO's financially constrained RTP. When you calculate VMT, there is some natural effect, just like those ones I listed there for demographic and employment location, the transit network and their service, and congestion and time of day factors, depending on your model, that has some influence on what else is happening on the entirety of your region. While you may think that your jurisdiction is an island, it's not an island, unless you actually are on an island, but I don't know if we have any of those in Oregon. The point is that there are some effects, positive, negative, in terms of VMT increases, VMT decreases. We do feel that for the most part, these effects are really small and also cannot be ignored because, again, no jurisdiction is an island. So we do recognize that some of your jurisdictional VMT are going to be affected by things that are happening elsewhere in the MPO, and you have, through the MPO process, whatever it is, JPEG for Metro and other similar ones for other MPOs, the chance to make some influence there to see what can be done about those type of influences. All right, and just a last bit on next steps for a few before we get to questions. Working with the last little bit with Metro and some testing we're doing here at TPAL to test these modifications, make sure we're comfortable with it. We're getting very, very close. Alex is going to run a few things on Bend and the COM regional models. I'm going to revise the methodology and make sure that everybody that's worked on it is okay. And then we're going to be able to publish it. And we can sort of put this part to bed. But as we learn more and we implement our PSPs, we know we may have some additional revisions as we go along. And I would certainly say, though Kelly is not here and our SCATS friends are maybe online, if you could, once the methodology is done and we can send it to you, if you want to run it on your own models, that would be great to get a big test of all the different implementations around the state. Okay, with that, I'll take any questions, if there are any. Yes.
I have a question. Just so I've tried to look through the rule itself. There's a lot of words in there.
Yes.
So I've heard induced demand mentioned a couple times. Is induced demand a term that's actually in the rule? And if so, how is it defined by ODOT, or how is it defined in the rule?
So induced demand, I believe, only shows up in Rule 830, and it's a bit of part of the analysis for evaluating a Rule 830 project. And the way it's defined for ODOT in Chapter 6 of the Analysis Procedure Manual, and different than latent demand, is induced demand are trips that are generated from let's say a change in land use, a big change, not just a change in route or change in time of travel. As it relates to the calculation in 830, as per the APM, SWIM, which has this integrated and feedback loop within our within the land use component, is something that can measure to a certain extent the changes in land use that would be created by a transportation project.
Okay. So, but if there's questions about that, we should refer to the APM?
The APM. I wish I could tell you exactly chapter and verse.
No, I mean, it's good.
It is in the APM.
Okay, so the definition used in the transportation rule is assumed to be the same that's in the APM, in case we have any questions.
Correct.
Okay.
We could probably provide a follow-up link.
Yeah, I'll look it up and I'll add it to the
Sure. No, that's great. We were just
curious
how it was being defined since the term was being used.
Tara's got your back. She's going to put it in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Tara. Yeah, and I mean, this is something that, you know, it's clear to me, and it's probably clear to a lot of other folks, but it's not clear to everybody. And there really is a big difference because because it does say sometimes latent and induced demand, and I think in like a colloquial term for those. I think they're used to be interchangeable, but they're really not when you get down to a very specific definition. And one of the questions that have come up was, well, can we use a regional travel demand model to measure induced demand? And I think the answer to that is yes, but in most types of analyses, the land use is held constant between, let's say, a no build and a build, and that's why you don't have that. I know for NEPA that's a requirement, for example. I mean, I know you know that.
No,
For everybody else.
No, it's good. It's good to know where the terms are being defined and how to look those up. So that's
Correct. Right. And that also is a bit of a tricky aspect because Rule 830, as far as induced demand, does talk about measuring the VMT related to induced demand. And it's pretty easy to conflate that with this general concept of calculating VMT per capita because it still says VMT per capita, but it's the induced demand VMT per capita.
I have a question, Zach.
Yes.
On your financially constrained TSP,
Yes.
I wonder if it's a requirement to consider the inflation factors in that. Anything written?
Yes.
I think the answer is yes. I mean, the selection of projects through that, through the fiscal viability of it through the transportation system planning process should incorporate some aspect of inflation in order to include projects on their financially constrained TSP or not. And I know that comes into specifically some of this aspect of the 30, where one of the exemptions are for projects that are no more than, or for under $5 million. And it's, yeah, Teresa.
I can add to that. So as a product of the TSP guidelines update, which I would have been leading, we are hot off the presses producing a financial constraint guidance document. We're running it by our internal manager team at the end of the month, and then it'll be posted on the web. But yes, we'll describe a few different ways to estimate out the local or regional budget for the constraint list. That list should include local projects as well as projects of other agencies in the planning area.
So, sorry. So for like the Metro model, that includes, non-home based trips that happen on the Oregon side that are generated from folks who live in Clark County, Washington. Have you guys thought about like trying to net that out at all? Or?
Yeah. So, I mean, Alex could probably speak to this more than I can because he's done a lot of research with like DKS and some of the other consultants who help put together the methodology. But we've looked at different approaches. And I think the problem with the trip-based model is that once you get away from the home-based trip, it's impossible to know exactly where the origin is, the household production origin of a non-home trip. And so I think the current methodology is probably a bit more reasonable given kind of the limitations of the trip-based model, where we're looking at the vehicle productions of non-home trips for TAZ, and then just assuming the regional average trip length for those non-home trips for each one of those. And so there's that's not ideal, but it's probably the best of like a set of ideal solutions.
Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, I think from the beginning of this work, we've always tried to do our best with the tools available, the same way we would do it for any type of analysis. And in areas where the tool isn't as ideal as we would like it to be, we then have the options of working within those constraints to try and make the most reasonable assumptions, state them clearly and transparently, and recognize that that's the best we can do. As we saw right before the lunch break, moving to the ABM is also not a perfect solution, but it will get us one step closer to our trip or our nirvana, a model in nirvana.
And just one more comment, like obviously the definition of home-based trips and non-home-based trips is specific to trip-based models. As we move into an ABM environment, we can actually track the vehicles. And so the distinction, it doesn't matter as much there. So maybe the methodology gets updated at that point, the language around the methodology to focus specifically on the vehicles rather than the trip purpose.
Right, and we actually have a slightly different methodology, which is super simple for the Southern Oregon model, because we have that benefit.
Mr. Chairman, we have a hand up online from Joseph at Hillsborough, but we're a little bit over time too.
Let me do a quick time check. And then we had a Q&A at the end here. I guess, Joseph, I'm not sure if it's a kind of a quick question or not, but if it is, feel free to ask it. And then if not, we can also save it for after Teresa's presentation.
It might be a longer, it's a question regarding unconstrained projects because the rules going back and forth whether we need to model VMT per capita for unconstrained projects. And I'm thinking more like we have projects that we don't want to put on financially constrained list, but we want developers to build that are 5 lanes. And so we can probably talk more later, but it seems like the focus of this meeting is more focused on the financially constrained, but it should also look at the constrained as well. And what the guidance is there, because there's a lot of conflicting things in a role.
I can give a quick answer. Application of the VMT per capita analysis in 160, which Zachary spoke about, applies to the constrained project list if it includes the 830 project, period. Short answer?
So does that mean if you're in the unconstrained, you're off the hook? Is that what?
Yes. Until you expand it to 5 lanes and then you go through the process.
But, okay.
And I'll probably, again, sorry, just for the sake of time too, Joseph, feel free to contact Teresa or Zachary as well for these questions. They're very helpful.
Hey, I'll just sort of dovetail on that. I know Carol was going to post these slides. For anybody that has detailed questions about any of this material or really wants to talk one-on-one or in a small group, please reach out to Teresa and myself. We know that there's lots of questions and some uncertainty, and we want to try and be as forthright and available as possible. So don't forget to reach out.
Okay, thank you. Real quick, there was a question from Matt about where to find the guidance. So at some point, you don't have to answer it now live, but you might want to follow up with the group about where the guidance will be posted.
Okay, I will.
Sounds good. So I think I'll hand it over to you, Teresa.
All right, thank you. For those who I haven't met yet, which are good, maybe some of you, I'm Teresa Conley, a principal planner over in the statewide planning unit and kind of Zachary's counterpart, implementing the updated TPR. And in that role, or one of the hats that I'm wearing is managing the multimodal inventory project, which is pretty big and exciting. And Alex and I are going to share a little bit about the project and then try to relate it back to the work that you all do on a daily basis. So I'm going to start with just the higher level, and then hopefully we'll have some time for dialogue as well. All right, next slide. So I'll give a quick project overview, highlight some of the data sets, and do more of a deep dive into the attributes of some of the data sets, and then that can be the tie-in to modeling, and then discussion. Next slide. Next slide. All right, so the core project purpose, and this is something we got to keep our eyes on as even a project management team, is to support cities and counties with their transportation system plans and to ensure, help ensure compliance with the updated TPRs. The rules were amended to really bullet point out a much more thorough existing conditions analysis, basically. And before my time, even when the rules were rulemaking was underway, ODOT received feedback. We're going to want some help building out this data set. Some of you may have given us that feedback. So this project is the result of that. And I say we have to keep our eye on the prize because we get excited about all the potential uses of this data, right? And how we can build on it in the future. But our budget is only so big. And this is a pretty aspirational sort of project already. So project objectives are to really do this work at scale, hopefully save some money across the TSPs, and have the side bonus of a hopefully statewide consistent data set that we can leverage for other types of work. We want the data to be locally owned, especially as it is now, for jurisdictions to continue to own and manage the data and utilize it as they need to. But then also, let's talk about how we can keep rolling up the data over the longer term at a statewide level for statewide uses and regional uses, just to maximize the usability. And so to that end, a core objective is a long-term data management and maintenance strategy. We won't actually, quote unquote, construct the strategy because we don't want to cross the line over into an IT project. So it's a lot of communication and coordination that we'll be doing over the next year. And we've just started like planting the seeds for, hey, let's start thinking about this. Because we know it's going to take many conversations to get to a strategy. Next slide. So here's a general synopsis of the project workflow. Our team has done a lot of work on, they've done an initial assessment of what data is out there right now publicly, kind of just a broad brushstroke sweep of what we have, what we're working with, and where the gaps might be. We've started to move into this iterative cohort model that's in a circle, and this is where we're working one-on-one with jurisdictions, metro, regional bodies as related to those cities and counties to dig deeper into the data. Okay, share your actual data set with us. Let's dig into it, what's missing, and then have those conversations about, okay, you have some sidewalk data. Do you want to replace it with this new data, or the data logistics? So having those individual conversations with each city and county. And there's 48, not counting the regional bodies and other partners. So we've adopted a cohort model. We have about 6 pilot communities that kicked off in late last year, and we anticipate providing data to them, I'll say early summer. And then we have a 2025 cohort that we've kicked off early this year, and we're just starting those conversations. And then we'll have the largest cohort in 2026, and that's just to manage workflows and then also learn as much as we can in these early months. And we're definitely learning a fair amount. And then one thing that is important with iteration is not just with these cohorts, but even our deliverables are iterative in a sense, especially as we work with the pilot communities. Oh, we didn't think of this, or we have to adjust the attribute in one way or another, or develop a kind of a proxy. If we can't get a sidewalk condition from AI, then let's have those conversations with local agencies and iterate that back into the process. Okay, next slide. So data sources, number one, local jurisdictions. We want to build on what data is already there, and also ODOT data. We have received our first bits of AI data, and we're digging into it and getting excited, but also sometimes scratching our head. That's happening right now behind the curtain. And we're starting to have some preliminary conversations, especially with the pilot communities, to just get into the weeds so that we can iterate improvements. But we're excited. We're excited to see where this goes. The AI is working with really high resolution aerial imagery, so we're hopeful that we'll get good data from it. And of course, local agencies are critical for the QA/QC process to the degree they have capacity. And our team also is doing QA/QC throughout the process. Okay, so let's dig into the data. Am I on track time-wise? You can just nudge me if I'm going long. So what are the data sets? It's multimodal, right? So we'll have vehicle and freight facilities, and these are the layers underneath. Bike and ped facilities, transit facilities. And then there's on the side other relevant data. The rules require key destinations to be defined in transportation system plans, also crashes. We don't think that this is the project to say, hey, Portland, these are your key destinations, right? That's a local conversation. So we're going to, our intent is to build out the structure, the schema for that, and then let those local conversations happen. And also the crash data, that way you can pool it at the time of your TSP. So in italics, there are new data. We're pretty excited to have bike routes, ped routes, and crossings derived from the AI data. And some, like the transit facility, most of the transit data we'll be able to pull from GTFS. So we're definitely working with existing data sources when we can. Next slide. Okay, digging into the data sets. So all per the rules, all of the data sets need to include these attributes, including condition, land use context. That's kind of a sticky one, and that's hey, we'll develop a schema that hopefully works for everybody, and then you work with it at the local level. And that can be a foundation too to talk with ODOT about the Bud urban context as well. So we're trying to parlay that into there. Maintenance, responsibility, ownership, functional class, these are all required pieces. Next slide. Okay, so digging into bicycle routes. These are some of the additional attributes specific for bike routes. I'm highlighting some because I want to lead this conversation towards how we can use this data for LTS, level of traffic stress, for example. So type, width, condition, the presence of a buffer or median refuges. These are all attributes that will be produced via the project. And through the AI, we are getting minimum and maximum for width for segments. And then also thinking towards LTS data, this is what we're pulling from or plan to provide with the roadway data sets. That includes functional classification, number of travel lanes, lane width, posted speed. And then I have a question mark here on pavement. What lines for each lane and also separate center lines for sidewalks. And then the bike lane. So it's pretty detailed data that we'll be getting through the vendor Ecopia, not just the roadway center line, but for each lane. And so hopefully from that we can get towards parking and some of the other inputs. And I want to flag intersection data. That's something people get excited about that we'll be kind of receiving on the side through the project. Here is just a snapshot of the data in the city of Ashland. So you can see what the bike and pedestrian crossings there in the black dash line, ped facilities in red, and bike facilities in blue. So this, from up here, it looks pretty good, right? And we're digging into it now as we speak. And so from the AI vendor, we'll be getting bikeways, sidewalks, off-street facilities, crossings, and intersection points. And then there's a note here about the restrictions around the use of the vendor data. And we've shared that with many of you in the room, I think, or your team members, just about external downloads of the data. You will have unfettered use. And so will your consultants. Next slide. Okay. So where we're at right now, as I mentioned earlier, we're working with the pilot communities, testing and learning a lot. And then we're also starting to dig in with the 2025 cohorts and plan to have that data released by the end of the year, and then same cycle for the 2026 cohort. So we're doing quality control on the initial AI data. And like I said earlier, beginning to have these discussions about long-term data management and what kind of model would work. Would it be like a centralized model or local or regional? Would it be status quo for the existing data sets and a new configuration for the sidewalk data? These are all question marks. We have started to send out project update emails every other month, and then we are scheduled to have 3 virtual briefings over the course of the project. And the next one we're targeting for early summer. So if you want to sign up for project updates, you can go to our Metropolitan Transportation Planning website, and there should be a little sign up button on there for that email list.
So I'm sure there's lots of questions about all that. I probably have questions too. But anyways, it's big and exciting stuff. And so the modeling group is regularly talking about like, okay, what can our models utilize from that data set? So unfortunately, we were thinking about how to time this, and I wanted to go after Teresa's next steps because we saw her schedule. And so on the ABM schedule, the important thing here is that estimation kicks off in 2025. So if you click the next slide, conflict, right? Like we don't have all of the data across the state by the time that we need it for estimation. So we really want to use as much of this data, lots of this data that's going to be collected at a high expense. I don't know if we want to say it's like you pulled the, like, it's like a lot of money. So we want to be able to use as much of that as possible in the estimation, but the timeline doesn't work out. So if you go to the next slide, So what we're attempting to do is be as aware as we can of what data we anticipate. So on the left is a copy of the slide that Teresa already showed, where talking about bike data that we anticipate to come, and thinking about, okay, when this data comes, how close is it going to line up to the definitions? And to be clear, the definitions in the right are still a draft in working form for what the end ABM definitions would look like. But do the definitions that we plan to use, will the new data sets slide into those as seamless as possible? So we're attempting to keep those two in coordination so that they line up as clean as possible. And in the meantime, since we can't have all the data that's being collected for estimation, to try and keep the definitions consistent and to populate the model estimation with as close to as possible, without duplicating all the expensive work that's occurring, get a good placeholder for estimation, which can always then be defined for the actual model inputs before a calibrated, validated model rolls out. So like in this example, we're attempting to pull OSM data for some of the bike inputs for at least ODOT's models as a proxy for what will eventually come at hopefully much higher quality out of this multimodal inventory work. So then the next slide, I would just also show, so some of the data we need for estimation, some of the data, like in this case, really detailed intersection and roadway inventory data will be great when we actually dial in how a given roadway is needed. That level of roadway representation specifics likely isn't needed for estimation. Estimation, we just need a broad level of congestion skims, not route by route delay. Route by route delay comes into calibration validation. So for this, I think we're good waiting until 2026. Anyways, the point is we're watching all components and trying to get the pieces in estimation where we need it, and then have everything else flow into calibration validation and be ready, and the model be ready to absorb as much of this data as possible. I think that's mine. So turn to questions. And are there any other closing statements?
I just had a curious question about the land use context. Is that like a categorical variable or like an open text definition or description?
Oh, goodness. Can you say that again?
The land use context,
Yeah.
is that going to be like kind of like a narrow categorical variable, like high density rural?
Like place type style?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember back to my GIS days and the language you're using. But yes.
Just thinking like
It's
how,
not like
how
open-ended.
well like standardized all these for different regions.
Yes, we want it to be standardized, yeah. And so we had a subgroup working on it to agree on standardization, building off generally from the highway design and manual urban context.
I was curious what your bold meant. I think it just means ones you wanted to highlight. There's no in the listing of attributes, you bolded some of them.
Yeah, I was trying to just put emphasis on attributes that would feed into level of traffic stress, ones that might pique the interest of this group.
Yeah, have you been following the whole GMNS discussion? So this is the generalized modeling network specification. Yeah, and I'm wondering as that becomes more adopted, if maybe there might be an effort to build that schema into this data. So this is essentially, for those not familiar, the GMNS is similar. It's trying to do for model networks what GTFS did for transit lines. So it's adopting a specification for networks that could be used across many platforms for modeling purposes.
So the contract requires consistency with state standards. And so I don't know if that would be inclusive of this.
AMPO-led initiative?
It's a Zephyr-led, initiative.
I know Josh was on here a little bit. I know Josh is pretty heavily involved. I mean, I think the short answer is there's no direct requirement because we don't have a spec to say you must follow this.
Yeah.
But I think a handful of us are watching it, and to the extent that we can push it in the right direction would be my.
I think it would be great if the state in general was just keeping our finger on the pulse of what's happening with that, and eventually maybe trying to work towards that, some kind of national specification.
I'd like to say that I would be very helpful, but I think Josh is probably ODOT's best hope there. He's pretty involved with the national conversation, but also watching the is advising the data development too, or watching the contract from a data perspective.
Who is the AI vendor for this?
Working with, or our consultant is working with Ecopia, and then Bexel is providing the aerial imagery.
We do have time for questions, so if there's other questions.
Chad, I'm trying to remember what it was. Something we could respond to probably just after the fact.
Go ahead, Chris.
This is more of a curious question than anything. You're talking about the land use context. Is there any effort to essentially map those, have a mapping of those when you do define those?
It would be associated with the roadway. Yeah. So we wouldn't. Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be overlaying the zoning or anything like that. It's just an attribute associated with it.
And then again, this is my ignorance. I probably should be more familiar. In the TPR rule, is there a requirement for updating this information?
There's not a requirement to participate in this project or to gather the data at scale. It just made sense. And in my mind, it makes sense to figure out a way to maintain the data. As, we're kind of making a down payment and creating this structure. How do we ensure that it's usable from the beginning and meets local needs, so that way we can maintain it and want to over the long term.
I'm curious about the kind of the AI side of this. Is there, when you're going through your QC efforts and you're pointing out, hey, your AI model, missed this, you provide that feedback back to the vendor. Is there a learning aspect? So they're retraining sort of their model? Okay, all right.
They were the ones directly contracted with and working with the AI vendor.
So then if you did provide it, apply it to the future, presumably the model would be better, 10 years from now or whatever, 8 years from now. Exactly, yeah.
Any other questions?
A lot of questions, but in the interest of time, I'll just say I really appreciate this effort. I've been kind of keeping an eye on it via Alex and others, and really happy that you all are coordinating the effort. There's no way to kind of overvalue this investment in the space networks, and data are just so critical to everything, and they are so hard. And I don't think people that don't work directly with it realize how challenging it is to get an up-to-date network with all the attributes you need and to make it routable. And so I'm really happy this is coordinating and not, sometimes it feels like we're doing parallel efforts around network development, and we could probably all benefit from each other's journey. So thanks, and I'll look forward to keeping up to date with it. So.
I appreciate that feedback, and I encourage you to get involved in that long-term management conversation and share your perspective.
I do wonder how were point people identified at the agencies? I don't know who at Metro is running point on our participation in this project, but I'm surprised I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Somebody with.
If there's ever a point at which to, put that call back out to see, especially in the modeling, among the modelers at agencies, maybe there's some other folks that at some point would make sense to have in the discussion.
That's a good point. I think it's primarily the data people, not necessarily the modelers, which could be a gap in our expertise around the table.
We might fight harder for long-term maintenance.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sounds great. Yeah, thanks, Joe. And of course, thank you, Zachary, Teresa, and Alex. All right. Yes, I see Jeff Hood. Yes, so we'll transition to our next item. And yes, unfortunately, we do have Jeff Hood from Metro. And one of the things I was mentioning at the beginning presentation is we have certain topic leaders, and Jeff's our topic leader for land use modeling, and he'll be talking about land use model. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Hello, thank you so much. Is that Carol? Pardon me, I don't know who's speaking. Who am I thanking?
All of us.
All of you. All right, thank you. I'm gonna share a my whole screen, I think. Oops, that's not what I wanted to show though. Here we go. Can you all see land use model development update and distributed forecast plan?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Jeffrey Hood. I'm a researcher and modeler at Metro, focusing on land use modeling. And I guess it's been almost a year now, we have been working on development of implementation of the UrbanSim cloud-based land use modeling platform for the Portland Metro region. And I think that the title of in the agenda was Metro's new land use model. I might say it's like Metro's new land use modeling platform. We're still in kind of the late stages of development. And so I'm going to kind of give an overview of the platform, the pieces that we're still working on, and then talk about our plan to apply this to the distributed forecast of population and employment, hopefully to be adopted this year. And possibly, if time permitting, give you a tour of the UrbanSim cloud platform. So let me just step back for a second. So no, it's fine. Here we go. So the UrbanSim, focusing on the middle of the slide in the center column here. The UrbanSim platform that we have, it takes control totals for the annual change in households by income and employment by industry. And then it has some household models where the households choose to relocate or migrate into the region, and then they choose a location within the region. And so that's the household relocation and location choice models. Then, in order to return a number of residential units in the region to a structural vacancy rate, the residential development location choice model takes the need for new housing units and allocates them to different locations in the region based on a bunch of factors. And then also jobs relocate and choose new locations in the region. And then finally, there's a real estate price equilibration, which adjusts the real estate prices based on the balance of supply and demand in different areas of the region. And then those prices get fed back up to the top. Although it doesn't, I put this arrow going all the way up to the annual household change in households, but that doesn't actually have that macroeconomic integration. So the arrow should only go from the real estate price equilibration to the household relocation and location choice model, and not the change in the total number of households. So on the left side of this slide, we have all of the inputs to UrbanSim. And then on the right-hand side, we have the big output of UrbanSim, which is households by income and employment by industry by block, which then is going to be fed into our transportation models, which finally feed back another input, which is the network level of service travel times from the transportation model. So on this slide, there's a whole bunch of color coding and variety of things, but basically the solid blocks are pieces that are complete, that we completed in the last year in our urban growth report. Regional economic model takes a whole bunch of macroeconomic and regional factors, demographic factors, births, deaths, et cetera. And for the entire metropolitan statistical area, forecasts the number of households by size, income, and the age of head by year, and also the employment in some kind of medium industry aggregations. So the boxes that are kind of dashed and shaded a little bit are the pieces that we're still working on here. So And the orange slides, the orange boxes, they kind of live in our finance and regulatory services because they involve, labor and industries and economic factors that are really outside of construction, land development, transportation, real estate, that type of analysis, which lives in our planning department currently. And so, but one thing that we need to do in order to get to a final urban sim implementation that we can apply to the distributed forecast is to remove some ex-urban counties that are in the metropolitan statistical area, Yamhill, Columbia, and Skamania counties, because all those are in the MSA. They're not in our 4-county transportation model, and so we can't integrate them with the network level of service matrices. So once we have those 4-county control totals, then those will inform urban sim for the annual change in households by income and employment by industry. Then there's another input which is in the wheelhouse of the planning department, which is the residential development capacity and profitability. So this is an estimate which is almost complete by our urban growth report process that we completed last year. But what that is at a block level. I mean, really, it comes from the parcel level. So it's kind of like urban sim is still kind of a hybrid block level, parcel level model. So the development, that's the number of housing units that could possibly be built, and also the profitability, which could be expected from developers, building new housing units in different locations in the region. And then finally, we need the employment capacity to get the job relocation and location choice model, so that jobs in different industries are going to the locations where they're most likely to locate. So continuing with the overview, these are the household models. So you have the new household population, and then you have the relocation model, which is the current population. Do they relocate? And then they actually choose a 10-year as well. And then the households the new households and the households that are relocating with the region choose a new location. And then that decision is constrained by the residential units that are available. The residential unit models, or the development model, it looks at the long-term structural vacancy rate and kind of puts into the region a new queue of residential units that need to be allocated to locations by builders. And the demolition model, which we may actually not use, since it's apparently, I don't think it's going to be necessary to get this done, but that models the current decision of people to demolish units that can then be developed to a higher capacity. And then those residential units are allocated to locations by the residential development project location choice model, and constrained by the residential capacity and influenced by the profitability and other factors like access to jobs and prices and things. And then finally, the employment models. There's new employment coming in because of new firm decisions, and then also relocation model jobs relocate within the region, and then those are allocated by the employment location choice model and constrained by the employment capacity. The new cloud, one of the great features of the new cloud-based urban sim model, which seems like very new, and it's very exciting, and so far seems well implemented, and very proud of and very excited about is the new machine learning calibration. So all of these models now can be jointly and longitudinally calibrated using the change in development and change in locations of jobs and households over the calibration period from 2010 to 2020. So they're all jointly and longitudinally calibrated for all of these models all at once over time using an differentiation framework where the derivative or the change in outputs relative to the change in coefficients in the model is calculated on the fly according to the combination of all these models together, using a machine learning code. And I'll hopefully have time to show you a little bit about how that works when we do the tour. Oh, finally, there was the price adjustment model, which I didn't get into yet. So the price adjustment model looks at the supply and demand, and if in locations where the demand is very near the supply, the prices will go down, and where the places where there's excess supply, there's a higher vacancy rate than the structural vacancy rate, then those prices will tend to go down. I'm not actually sure right now how this is used in the employment models, but I know that this I think is what is describing the residential models. So finally, I want to talk about this, our proposed schedule to complete the distributed forecast this year. So the draft urban growth report was completed around last July, and then it was adopted by the council, and there was a decision to expand the urban growth boundary in Washington County in west of the city of Sherwood. And that was done in December 2024. And then following kind of the same cadence, we're looking to complete a draft distributed forecast by July of 2024, which will then be adopted for the 3-county area in December of 2025. Following that, in the next year, we'll do reconciliation with Clark County, Washington, and also we have a new expansion to our metropolitan planning area, the federally designated MPO planning area in northern Marion County in the cities of Aurora and Hubbard and Woodburn. And so we'll need to add that into the model following the council adoption of the 3-county area. And then that will all be used in our next RTP, which is due in 2028. So that's kind of the overview of the platform. And now I will kind of show you what it looks like on the web here. So this is the Urban Sim scenario modeler. The metros look at that, and so we can create a new project. I'll call it the OMSC demo, and I select the Portland Area Metropolitan Service District, and I say we want to do regional scenario modeling. So you open this up, you get the data library, which has a whole bunch of layers here. So we can look at building footprints. You can add a bunch of layers at the same time. And, it's just kind of your standard GIS viewer stuff. Might be taking a minute to load. So, there we go. Just got to zoom in, which has data about the height of buildings and the building footprints to help us get the floor area ratios of desired. And then I'm going to dig right into the kind of the secret sauce of Urban Sim, which is this automatic differentiation calibration framework I was describing. I'm realizing I was looking at that and thinking it was 4 minutes and 20 seconds a while ago. Now I'm realizing it's 4 hours and 20 minutes. So what time is it right now? I've been talking for 16 minutes. Okay, great. So right now we're working with model version 1.0.3, and to run a new calibration, these settings are kind of, we just leave them the same because they're in the gradient descent algorithm, which is used for parameter search. And unless the calibration breaks, we don't really need to change them. And so the way that we specify variables is with this variable definitions file. And I've downloaded one of those, so I'll just go ahead to that. So there's a whole bunch of basic data in the urban sim model, the residential units for 2010 and 2020, et cetera. And then there's this kind of shorthand code to define new variables for the model if we want to test them in calibration. So there's a lot of interesting functions that come in here from a machine learning library that make sure that the surface for gradient descent and searching for the new parameters doesn't blow up. So there's a lot, safe divisions and these, I forget what JAX stands for, but it's a NumPy library for machine learning. So, it calculates the renter's vacancy rate is this function based on the division of renters to units, but there's a safe divide in there to take into account that we don't want this automatic differentiation framework to blow up. And so there's all this plumbing in the background that then create all of these functions are all differentiable natively, automatically through the platform. So I don't need to specify what the gradient is for the loss function, which the model is searching for the optimal solution to calibrate all these parameters. It all happens behind the scenes using the Urban Sim's new secret sauce. So after we have the variable definitions, then we can create a model specification for the parameter search. So, for example, here in the demolition model, for units that are owned, there's a logit function, a discrete choice model based on multinomial logit model, just choosing, I guess, a binomial logit, whether to demolish the building or not. And that by putting these terms in there, the function will now have an intercept. It'll have the logarithm of the age of the building, the job access, the price, the number of units, and the proportion of persons in the block who have a low income. And I guess this is all actually at the block level. So all the parcel level data that we feed into the model all gets aggregated into the block, and then the model is deciding how many units to demolish in the block, which is obviously usually very close to 0 in 1 year. So when we do the calibration, we feed it this arbitrarily small number that's not 0, but so that the gradient descent is able to begin. And then when the calibration finishes, we get the optimal specification based on the solution of the large, many parameter combination of multinomial logit models. So this happens to say that some of this is a great example of why we still need to work on this a lot, I'd say, because a lot of these variables are correlated together. So the built age, this is saying that, if I'm understanding correctly, the more likely, the older a building is, the more likely it is to be demolished if it's owned. The less likely it is to be demolished if it's owned, which to me is not in concordance with expectations and reality. And so this is, I'd say, What?
Well, you're taking, it's a log, right? So that just means that the built age is less than 1, yeah?
No, so this is the coefficient that's being applied to the logarithm of the built age. Right.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
So I think what's probably happening here is that you have all these variables that are correlated together, and the machine learning, it's probably overfitted right now, and we need to take some of those out. I'd say a downside of this machine learning calibration method is that we don't get all the familiar statistics. Like, we don't know what the standard error of this built age coefficient is. So we have to do a lot of diagnostics outside the model to look at, why might this, coefficient be reverse and, need correction. And, that's probably one of my dreams for long-term development for UrbanSim for this framework, is that they can look into creating some sort of, not only to do the gradient descent and calculate the minimum of the loss function, but also to look at the curvature of the loss function, so we can understand how rapidly these coefficients change. I mean, the loss function changes as we move away from these coefficients, and that could help us determine whether we're at some local minimum that's not actually the best solution. Okay, so that's the calibration interface, and I'm starting to go into the questions time. So I'll just briefly mention that once you do the calibration, then you just, after that, it's really just hit and go, I suppose. So I create a new scenario and input the control totals, which is the number of households and employment by income and age. And then, so I create a new year, 2030, and, input this. Maybe it's not 1 million, maybe it's 1.2 million, et cetera. And then that's really the only thing you need to change. And then you just hit the button, and you get a lot of, you get all of the there's maps and stuff like that. But another thing I did want to show you was the calibration that we kind of has been selected to be delivered to us. There's all these diagnostics down here looking at. So this is for households. The change in households for over 2010 to 2020 has a 85.85 correlation, and you can look at the housing units, which is very tight. So the development is definitely being directed to the proper place. Employment is reasonably tight as well. These things start to break down right now around the rents. The rents are kind of the weak point right now, but for the distributed forecast process, we're not really concerned about rents and prices, but the prices do a little bit better than the rents right now. So with that, I will stop talking and open it up to questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. Thanks for the kind of demo. Yeah, we do have time for questions. Any questions in the room? Oh, Terry has a question in the chat. Maybe I'll just read it to you, Jeffrey. I have missed this. How are the capacity constraints calculated? From zoning, is this an input to UrbanSim? What is done when it's mixed use zoning that could be either employment or residential?
Great questions. So for our last urban growth report, a local economist named from Johnson Economics, Jerry Johnson, developed a pro forma model, which is the we call it our developer supply processor, or DSP pro forma model, and that looks at the zoning, it looks at environmental constraints on each parcel, and it looks at where prices are currently, and it looks at a whole bunch of construction inputs, how much does a parking space cost, a whole bunch of different factors, which then determine what the likely highest and best or most profitable use on the parcel would be. And it also calculates the probability of redevelopment based on the ratio of the residual market value, the residual value of the land after development compared to the current market value of the whatever structure is on the property currently. And then that, so there's a highest and best use, the number of units in there, then the ability determines the probability that that is going to occur. And then, so that's where the capacity comes from. And then I forgot, there was a second part of the question, which I don't remember now, pardon me.
I think you answered it was how does, if it's mixed, if it could be their employment or residential, how does it choose? But I think you answered it.
But yes, so I mean, on a mixed use parcel, it's possible that if it's permitted, I mean, it's not always permitted to build a solely residential structure in a mixed use parcel. More often it's permitted to build something that's not residential only, but you could see either probably not office these days, but either retail or residential properties on those mixed use zones.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
If I'm hearing you right, I'm somewhat in disbelief. Like I don't understand. Don't comprehend. You have price and rent at the parcel level, like for 10 years. Am I hearing you right? What data you have?
That comes from UrbanSim. They have a subscription with licensing to us for. I think maybe some of it comes from Census as well though. So that is kind of native in the UrbanSim platform.
Oh, interesting. Do you have the ability, like, I suppose it's proprietary. You can't like export it and do whatever you want with it, I suppose.
I haven't asked them for the price data yet. No, yeah. We're getting a lot of the household data, all the other stuff. And the environmental constraints data that they're using, and mostly we're trying to replace as much as we can that's native in the UrbanSim platform from our own local data sources from our ARLIS database, because that helps us be more responsive to the the administrative, legislative, political contexts and questions that we're most likely to encounter here.
Makes sense. Thanks.
So, hey, is it okay? Fine. So do you get to, like, are you building the loss function, or does UrbanSim provide it? And then at the end, were you showing that was at like out of sample tests to say how well it did when you had the Pearson, the coefficients?
Those were in sample tests. So we do want to, we're going to do at some point, we're going to do a forecast out, not only do the kind of back casting from 2010 to 2020, but then also do a simulation from 2020 to 2040 and compare it to other data sources. The hard part is, like, ACS has so much error in it anyway. Like, can we make any reliable conclusions from that? I'm not sure. But the loss function, there's some ability to configure and customize the loss function, but it's basically, it looks at each of those variables, the households, housing units, employment, prices, and rents, and it normalizes them so that the scales between them are comparable. And then it looks at the normalized mean squared error between over the blocks of those different variables, and then adds those up to get sums those for all the different variables.
Right. That's what you want. Those are what you're wanting to predict, and it's just looking back over that training set, and those were the in-sample errors you got. And so on rent, it was not so good, but on other ones, it was. Right, and then of course, if you got a little, so they don't give you any guidance on building the model, meaning choosing all your inputs. You kind of have to, on your own, look for those correlations and make sure you're not overfitting. Does it provide any kind of upfront dimensionality reduction of any sort?
So they did do a setup of the, you know, I mean, I think that was version 15, 1.15 of their efforts, right? So they did do some calibrations, just, you know, kind of get us going with where they felt it was, you know, satisfactory, at least to predict the household housing units and employment. And one thing I will add is that, to be honest, we've been doing this on a shoestring budget in terms of in the schedule. I mean, to be able to get this in a year for the amount of money that we had put toward this it's kind of astounding. I mean, I'm still got my eye on the prize of like, how are we going to be looking at housing affordability in, you know, if we got to get the prices and rents right to look at housing affordability for our next UGR. But we have, you know, another like 4 years until we're going to be putting this model to that purpose. Our goal for this year is just to get the households and employment in the right spot for our transportation model.
So Jeffrey, for the new, and maybe Peter and Matt can chime in on this too, for the new distributed forecast, are you all going to use Urban Sim and then refresh? So produce a set of land use inputs for the travel model, run the travel model, create a new set of skims for Urban Sim, run Urban Sim with those new skims, create a new set of inputs for the travel model. Are you going to do that whole integrated process, or is it going to be more streamlined? Or TBD, I guess. Yeah,
probably TBD.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we did some of that with the old Metroscope model, but it was using very generic travel time skims for like, it was like AM peak period only for really large aggregations. The zones were huge. And so there wasn't much like feedback. I mean, there was feedback, but there wasn't much difference between not a lot of sensitivity. And so I guess we'll see what might be different this time around. I don't think we've quite got there yet in our discussions.
What are you using for your testing, Jeffrey, right now in terms of skims from the model? Are you using?
We are, so that's was an interesting part of the development, which I think if Taya Patton were here, then she'd be able to say a lot more about that. But we had to, you know, because we had to create a 2010 skim, and that was a long time ago now. So there was a lot of like readjusting and trying to create networks and stuff that work with our current model, because we couldn't have the model to like set up in a 2010. And so that was an interesting and complex process, but I can't really comment on it because I didn't do that. I just advised on it.
So I do apologize. There's a couple questions in the chat, Jeffrey. I'm not sure if you're able to stay on and maybe answer those.
I can try.
Okay, wonderful. Really great work. I mean, well done. But I think we'll move to our last part of the agenda. And this will be with Chris Johnson here. In terms of the OMSC, Chris is part of the coordinating committee for the OMUG. And so he'll provide an overview, kind of an update from the OMUG, and also some things and events and conferences to kind of look out for. I'll hand it over to you, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, so for those of you who need a little refresher, and Chris actually did a great job sort of explaining OMUG's role earlier today. But OMUG is the Oregon Model Users Group. It's sort of the outward-facing arm of OMSC, kind of the little social animal with OMSC. So, again, its purpose is to really provide just sort of a get together for folks to kind of share ideas and chat about sort of all the goings on in modeling in Oregon. So, sorry, Carol, that's all right. So you don't have to go back. Along with Carol, the coordinating committee is Joe and Leming and myself. So that's all I was going to say. I also should say that I am just coming to the committee after this year replacing Garth. And so I think my technical in-service date was first of the year. Is that right, Carol? Okay. So we've already spent some time putting together a program for the next year or so. Actually, this is last 6 months, so this is a little backward looking. So these are the things that OMUG has hosted and supported over the last 6 months. Jeff referenced the Urban Sim deep dive, which was quite interesting around some differential programming that Urban Sim is now incorporated. Prior to that or after that, we've had our typical TRB post TRB brown bag, where folks come in and share their experiences from the TRB annual meeting. And in December, I did miss this one, but we had a session on performance measures and standards and mobility policies with Joe and Peter from Metro and Zachary from ODOT participating in that. So I believe the next slide is coming up. So coming up, we've got in early May a session, deeper dive on vision eval, and we're going to have some folks share their experiences from across the country. So folks from Minnesota are going to share their experiences. Laming is going to give us an update on sort of some new land use research that he's looking to incorporate into vision eval, and then Joe and Josh are going to walk through some of the new developments on the bicycle side with respect to vision eval. And then Tara and Jonathan Slayson from RSG are going to talk about the roadmap for vision eval moving forward. So that's May. We're still working on some of the other sessions we want to roll out, but we're thinking that in summer we want to get folks together for a session that'll focus on freight modeling, freight analysis, that sort of thing. And then after the data comes out, we're hoping to do a celebratory session, we'll call it that.
That one needs like party icon, like emojis all over it. Like that needs to be like a huge bash.
So we'll when we're saving the date for a fall celebration on the Oregon travel study, and then later on in the year we'll get into some reporting out on bicycle modeling improvements and some of the multimodal inventory stuff that we already talked about today. And then I think the last slide is just conferences. So a few conferences, that are near and dear to my heart to note here, in addition to all the other ones that are on the list. I would point out that the Zephyr Modeling Mobility Conference that's scheduled for mid-September in Minneapolis. For those of you that attended TRV's Innovation and Travel Modeling / Planning Applications sort of tandem conferences, that's the new version of that, if you will, and it's being I believe Peter's still. Are you still active on sort of the planning committee? Oh no. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, but that I would put an asterisk by for folks who are interested in going to a good modeling conference, and then if you all remember Railvolution, that conference that has now been rebranded to Impact, and that's kind of a big deal, and it'll be here in Portland in October. I think we started a brief conversation about maybe convening a happy hour along with that, Carol, a modeling happy hour with that. So stay tuned on that. But there's a interesting looking conference up in Seattle around AI. I've never been to the Tools of the Trade conference, but I've heard good things about it down in Albuquerque. So all sorts of interesting conferences to choose from. So go ahead, Alex.
Don't know the rail one. Is it heavy rail? What are we talking about?
It's rail transit. Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of all the above. Yeah. And now it's probably includes BRT, right?
Yeah, I mean, it started out it really started out in, I think Metro was one of the Metro and TriMet and Blumenauer, and it was around light rail, but it's all transit, and it really changed its name because some places don't want to invest in light rail, but other transportation, especially transit focuses. It's not, I've been to a bunch of them, but it's not a whole lot of modeling. FTA used to be there regularly to talk about new starts and small starts. The last few years, they've kind of tailed off with their attendance. I think they're supposed to be there this time again. So it's not super technical, but it's a lot of fun. A lot of cool.
That stands for, does it stand for something?
It's like impact.
Impact,
Right, yeah.
but
I don't know what,
remember.
maybe it's mobility. I don't know.
Mobility, I
Yeah,
think so.
that's a good question.
Number impact.
Revolution is a better name, but
Yeah, so, but anybody have any other conferences that aren't on the list that they're headed to and want to share? Oh. Yes, AMPO.
Yeah, and it's right after modeling mobility conference.
Oh, yeah.
I did too.
Sounds good. Again, just I guess a quick thing for the OMUG, you feel free to reach out if you do have ideas about events to Chris, Joe, or I mean. And I think we will adjourn here. Thank you all so much for everyone for attending in person, and also virtual, and of course for our presenters as well. Always really a great meeting that I personally look forward to here. So I'll stop. I don't. There's for folks that are in person here, there's potential, after meeting social events. I forgot where is it at? Oh, sorry, right there, right on the screen. So
You can pronounce that.
Yeah.
California.
California.
So locally, it's pronounced California.
Yeah, California.
Oh, I use
It's an English spelling of the KALYP. And now I'm gonna miss the last couple letters, but the indigenous tribe that was central to this region. And there's two spellings because of the river.
Sounds good. But yeah, thanks everyone. I'll conclude the meeting here officially.
Chris.
Thanks, you guys.